Hello, and welcome to In the Roud. Greetings and salutations, dear listeners. My name is Matt Quinn, and this is In the Roud, a folk song podcast. I'll be your host to guide you through the world of traditional folk song as we go through the Roud Index, one song at a time. Each episode will feature two guests, one providing an historical look at the song, while the other will be a singer from the folk music scene to talk about their own version of the song. Way back at the beginning of this podcast, I recorded an interview with Steve Roud himself, where he explained a little about the index, so please head back to that introduction episode if you are unsure what the Roud Index is. We're in the middle of Season 2 now, and this is Episode 5. This week's song is Roud 15, The Cruel Ship's Carpenter. Later on, we'll hear from singer Andy Turner, but for now, let's take a look at the history of the song with singer, researcher and regular In the Roud contributor, Vic Gammon. Well, hello Vic Gammon. How good to see you again.
Hello. Nice to be back.
Good. I'm glad. We last had you on here about a month ago, I think, for the as the singer guest for Roud. What was it? 11, I think it was.
Yeah.
For the Baffled Knight Child. Roud 11 Child 112. But you're back in your capacity as history, as the historical side of which you gave us two songs on the last season as well, didn't you? And that was great stuff. So looking forward to this. How have you been since we last saw you?
Not bad, except I had COVID after Whitby, which I think most people did, and various things like that. But in myself, fine. I've just taken delivery of a newly fettled F single row melodeon, which is wonderful.
Right.
Our friend Peter Rogan did it for me, and it sounds great.
Excellent. We need more melodeons in the world.
Absolutely.
Right. Well, here we are already at Roud 15.
Yep.
Which is The Cruel Ship's Carpenter and our first non-child ballad of the season.
Yep.
Because we've had 4 weeks of child ballads. Apart from, of course, 2 weeks ago on the main podcast stream, I did release the first Patreon episode because I had to delay the main podcast and Dowie Denzaviero by a week. So 2 weeks ago, or was it 3 weeks ago? It might have been. We did have a non-child ballad, The Wee Weaver, but that was not part of this season technically, but we did have it. So in terms of numerically going through the Roud Index, this is our first non-child ballad of this batch of songs.
It's certainly a ballad.
It's certainly a ballad, but it's not in child.
No, but child. I mean, to say child is such an important collection. I mean, but he didn't really. I've just been looking at that book by Mary Ellen Brown.
We had a chat about this before we started recording. The book, Child's Unfinished Masterpiece.
What's amazing is how uncertain he was of his own. He never really decided what he was actually up to. I mean, the child collection is so rich you can't ignore it, but it's not watertight. I mean, and his criteria was sort of literary. It was about a notion of the popular ballad, which was a certain form of literariness which he liked, so he, the famous quote, he thought songs like the one we are going to discuss today, which is, I think, pretty much a product of the Broadside Press. He called the Broadside ballad collections a veritable dunghill, which one grubs through and then finds a moderate gem, something like that. I can't get the quote quite right, but
it's interesting with child because Brian Peters was talking last week about the Demon Lover and about because it's child number 243 out of 305, and Brian was thinking that so many of those supernatural ballads in Child are quite early on
Uh,
in numbers, but Child decided to relegate the Demon Lover to somewhere near the end of the thing, as if he didn't like it compared to the other supernatural
the
ones.
last, once you get up in the 280s, 290s, these are the ones that Child really wasn't that certain about at all. Uh, and he I mean, I've reading Mary Ellen Brown's book. You become more sympathetic to him. He was a busy life. I mean, he did this as a sort of hobby, really. Think of him as this big professor of literature at Harvard and so on. But this was almost a side interest, and he had a lot of other jobs to do, and he liked growing roses as well. So,
Well, there we go.
no, you could spend hours on Child, and people do,
You
and people
can.
have done, and it's all good
Yes.
stuff.
Anyway, not a child ballad today.
No.
Round number 15, The Cruel Ship's Carpenter.
Mm.
So where do we stand with this one? What's the song about? What's the
Well, the
plot?
song is about the a murdered sweetheart. It's a pretty bloody, gory song, and yet enormously popular. I mean, we're talking. It seems to date from the early 18th century. I thought it was older at first, but it's in the format of the older ballads. But I think it's probably 1720s, something like that. And it's a song which has lasted. It's metamorphosized really about twice. I think we can think of three big versions of it. There's the very early one, the broadside one of the 18th century, which is 35 verses long.
Wow.
You could reconstruct a performance because we know the tune it was written to. That's one of the clues. It's a broadside ballad. It goes to the tune of Peggy's "O'er the Sea with a Soldier," which is certainly a tune that's extant. So we could no, I don't think anybody ever has. I've never heard it reconstructed. And it would take a long
Right.
time to sing. It would take you,
Yes.
probably 10, 12 minutes to sing it, but it could be done. I'm not recommending it, but it could be done. And then it sort of metamorphosizes into something very much closer to the version that Andy sings on later in the podcast. A 19th century version. It's about a dozen verses long, something like that. And that's the one that's widely circulated in oral tradition as well, the one that Harry Cox and people like that sing. And then, of course, it goes to America, where it exists in various forms. There are some quite close to the original 18th century form, but it most particularly and most famously becomes the song Pretty Polly. I courted Pretty Polly the livelong night and left her next morning before it was light. And not only has the story boiled down to its essence really by then, but also so has the format of the song. It's more like a blues in its format. One line repeated, third line, and that's the verse.
Right.
And yet, even with its austere and stripped down sort of form, it's a tremendously powerful song in the right singer's hand. Listen to someone like Eddie West sing it, and this is wow. This is a song.
Yeah.
Lots of people liked it. Dylan liked it.
There we go.
I
There we
just
go.
watched Scorsese's film on Dylan, so it's a bit in my mind.
Oh yeah, yeah. I haven't seen that yet, but I keep meaning to.
It's a good watch. It's a good watch.
Yeah.
What a troubled, interesting, and clever man he was.
Mm. So yeah, what's the plot of the song then? What are we dealing
Well,
with?
it's yeah. I think the best thing to do, what I'd like to do, is to summarise the original long broadside, because all the stuff that comes later is actually already there in the first version. You get bits lost, you get bits lopped off, you get bits that aren't that transform in certain ways. I mean, it has three different endings, for example. But
Well, we had this last week with the Demon Lover, with the
uh,
Brian Peters talking about the what we think might be the original broadside, or at least the earliest one we know,
uh,
has like 21 verses before you get anything remotely resembling what we know as the Demon Lover now. You know,
wow.
so
Okay.
things get
So
lopped off.
so it may not be a quick summary because it's a long song. 35 verses in the original version. It's the Gosport tragedy, Gosport on the south coast, or the
Oh yeah.
perjured ship's carpenter. It's supposed to go to this tune, Peggy's Gone Overseas with the Soldier, which is certainly, if the song does date from about the 1720s, then it's absolutely been on the go for some time, that tune. So that does suggest it's a broadside creation. So it's worth, I think, summarising in full because, um, as I say, all the elements are there from the start. They just get emphasised or changed or developed in the later versions. Um, the So the early stanzas introduce us to two characters. One is a beautiful woman living in Gosport. The other's a man who is a ship's carpenter, and they go under the name of Molly and Willie. He proposes marriage, but she resists. She says, "Young men are fickle. I see very plain. Uh, uh, if a woman's kind, that the he'll just cast her aside. That idea." But he keeps this is interesting bit because this gets lost in later versions. But he really presses her about three verses of him imploring to basically sleep with him. So he wears her down basically in those early verses, and he presses her. They obviously have sex. She becomes pregnant. Now the surprise, surprise, this country is at war with somebody, and the king wants sailors, um, which goes for most of the 18th century and a lot of the 17th and 19th as well. Uh, she doesn't want him to go abroad. She wants him to remember his vows and marry her. They haven't married, but she's pregnant, and that's a very important part because a woman in that situation is extraordinarily vulnerable. Uh, Vulnerable, we can't imagine without going back and looking at some of the poor law records, for example, how difficult it was for unmarried pregnant women. They were, they had to go into the workhouse. They basically were in a very bad way. They didn't have a lot going for them. But she does in the early version. This is quite interesting. In the early version, she says she'll haunt him if she's forsaken. But he promises to marry her and bring the license the next day, but he doesn't. He takes her out to see friends and leads her through groves and valleys. That's a consistent bit in a lot of the versions. She obviously,
I recognise that bit. Yeah.
yeah, led her through groves and valleys to deep. She obviously fears that he's going to do a nasty on her, uh, and probably going to murder her. And he says, "Yep, you're right. I dug your grave last night," which is pretty chilling when you think how this isn't an act of passion. This is an act of premeditated murder to get him out of the situation that he's in of having got this poor woman pregnant. And she pleads with him to spare her life, and he says, "No, no, no, no time." And he stabs her. He pierced her heart while the blood flow, and into the grave the body did throw. So he buries her, goes back on his ship. Now this is where that's pretty much common to a lot of the versions. This later bit is a bit different in other versions. He's a ship's carpenter. You remember ships are those wooden blooming things that you need a few carpenters on board just to keep the thing going, holes
Yeah, of
develop, all
course.
sorts of things. If you've seen Master and Commander film, you know what it's about.
Oh, that's one of my favourite films.
It's a
I
good
adore
film.
that film.
The sound construction is wonderful on that film. I first watched it with headphones on, and I mean, you're in that world. The sounds are coming from everywhere around you. The sounds of that creaky old
You
boat.
really get the feel of being in that
Yeah,
ship.
yeah.
Yeah, it's
There we are.
extraordinary.
So anyway, but he hears her voice. He's on the ship. He hears her voice. And she swears revenge, and she swears the ship won't get out of Portsmouth. But nobody sees her except him. But later, another man who's interestingly named Charles Stewart, we're getting very specific here, sees the
Wow.
ghost and goes and tells the captain. The captain's immediately worried because this is not good to have a murderer on board. There's a lot of belief, a lot of folklore around this. If a murderer's on board, it'll upset the ship, and the ship can be in danger. And he questions the men one at a time, and William is obviously very afraid at this time, and the ghost appears to him. He confesses murder out of hand, and he seems to die in the night, distracted, mad. And this is different from the later versions. We can talk about the later, but he seems to die of madness caused by the ghost. In this version, the parents hear this story. We don't know, the time lapses are very difficult to understand. They go and seek the body and they find it in a lonely place, and they bury the poor woman in Gosforth churchyard. And the song ends with a typical moralistic warning. All young men take a warning, don't betray innocent maidens like this. You know, otherwise you'll get into trouble. That sort of thing. So it's a melodrama in a way. It's gory. And yet it's obviously captured popular imagination just because it's lasted so long and gone through these different versions.
Right. Wow. So yeah, this brings on to the next question, as it always does. It was extremely popular and widespread, and as I think you and I were talking before we started recording it quite international as well.
Yeah, quite international. I mean, it's printed all over by the 19th century, not this 18th century version, but by the 19th century, the shorter version. I counted 18 English towns and cities it was printed in. It was also printed in Boston in the USA. It was printed in Scotland. It got to Ireland. So, I mean, yes, it's reported from tradition in England, Scotland, Ireland, Canada, USA. So really a great chunk of the
Yeah.
English speaking world, and probably stuff we probably in Australia and goodness knows where else, because we just don't know. They didn't
Yeah.
start collecting till later. So
And I think it's right, isn't it? You said to me there was if you look it up on the Roud Index, there's 717
that's
entries.
what I saw yesterday. I mean, we have to
717.
remember some of those are duplications because if a thing
Oh
is
yeah, of
in the
course.
manuscript, but it gives you a rough and ready idea. It's not a Barbara Allen, that's in the 2000s, but it's approaching the thousand. It's a pretty widespread and popular song. There's no
Yeah,
doubt
yeah.
about that.
Brilliant. So how far back can we trace this? What was that you were from the abroad side? You were sort
Yes,
of
there's the
doing a
broadside.
doing a summary of.
That's the rock one in the Roxburgh collection, and we think now it's about 1720s, 1720, 1750, something like that. First half of the 18th century, but we maybe come on to the reasons we think it's more likely to be the 1720s later. And it exists in this long form, and then, as with a lot of ballads, someone somewhere starts chopping it down. This may be to do with a change of ballad sheet format. We have, these big old sort of portrait style black letter ballads, and even when it becomes white letter, so black letter's the Gothic type, white letter's the Roman type, and they keep the same format for a while. You get a lot of words on those. That's why 17th century ballads are always long. They're always slightly interminable. But once you
So
get
would that have been like an A4 paper size?
bigger than that, I think.
Bigger than
Yeah,
A4?
yeah, yeah.
Okay, wow.
But printed, printed sideways, printed landscape.
Okay,
So I mean, there's plenty of them to look at online.
yeah,
Uh, but it is interesting when you see them. You sometimes are surprised how big they are. But
wow,
then you get in the 18th century, you get the development of these Garland songbooks, which are tiny 8-page songbooks. So they print all the songs on one sheet and fold it 4 times to make an 8-page songbook. And these Garlands, there are hundreds of these things, with all sorts of picturesque titles. And so you really want shorter songs. Otherwise, one song takes up the entire Garland.
right, yeah,
And that seems to be, we don't have some, I think the ballad press has been studied well for the 17th, early 18th century, well for the 19th century. This middle period we have less knowledge about. You have this famous printer, Clue and Dicey in London, which there's some quite interesting work on, but it is the less known. The middle bit is less known than the two ends in a way, and it's less represented in quite a lot of the collections. You can go on the California University English Broadside Ballad Archive, and there's a wonderful collection getting on for 10,000 sheets now, I think, of basically the 17th century stuff.
Wow.
And
Oh, say that name again. I'll add a link to it to the podcast.
yes, you don't need to look it up, but it's English Broadside Ballad Archive. It's housed at California University, and they're trying to their aim, and I think they're getting near it, is to reprint all the ballads published before about 1700. So this
Wow.
includes the Pepys ballads, the Ewing ballads, and all those. The Roxburgh are in there, but some of the Roxburgh stuff goes later anyway.
And you said that was California, was it?
California
Exclusively.
University's Patricia Fumerton is the woman behind driving force behind a lot of
Cool.
it.
I'll try and find that and put a
Yeah,
link
I
to it
mean it's
in the
worth.
show notes. Yeah.
I think you'll find the Gospel Tragedy. I mean, the date is a rough cut-off. It's roughly the changeover from the black letter, the Gothic type, to the white letter Roman type. They always say it's around 1700, but you find earlier white letter and you find later black letter. It's not a
Sure.
strict. It's roughly, it's just useful to think of the start of the 18th century as a time when things at least were changing, if not had changed fully.
Sure. Yeah. Right.
As I say, it changes. Someone cuts it down in
Oh yeah.
the maybe the early 19th century. We don't know, but to cut it from 35 verses to 11 is quite drastic.
That's a pretty hefty chop.
But there's a lot of that goes on. A lot of that goes on. I mean, talk to other people, talk to Steve Rouse, talk to Steve Gardner, they know about this. So, yeah, I think it's perhaps to do with the change of format. They want shorter songs. Perhaps people are getting fed up with these interminable songs. I don't know. But there's a lot of, I mean, if you think of John Barleycorn as a good example, the modern version, the one that circulates. Peter Wood did a very interesting article on this. It's a 3-4 minute song. If you go
Yeah.
back to the 1620s, I think 30s, ballad of the bloody murder of John Barleycorn. It's a long old song. It's about 8 minutes, and it takes up a whole of one of these early broadsides.
Fantastic.
And as I say, I do think that the printers were cutting them down. They were cutting them down. And also, I mean, there's that whole problem of how much was recirculated from oral tradition. Because if a printer hears a song in a pub and writes it down and it's useful, he hasn't had to pay a shilling for a pop poet to write him one. That sort of thing was going on as well. So you get this constant interaction of the print and the um, oral. I just think it's back and forward all the time, really.
Yeah. So how did the plot of the song change with the excised verses?
Well, it's it doesn't it loses some bits. It particularly loses the whole chunk about him pushing himself on the woman. The pleading, the entreaties. It loses that bit, and it loses other bits, but a lot of the action remains the same. He promises her marriage. He wants to, uh, he wants to sleep with her. He wants to, but then he takes her off through groves and valleys. They see the grave. He murders her. Goes on board the ship. One of the interesting things is that there's an element introduced in the later ballads which makes it. I was very surprised that it was this way around, but it makes it quite different from the earlier one. He doesn't go mad with distraction because of the ghost. She physically, I mean, as some of the versions say, she ripped him, she stripped him, she tore him in three. There's a real physical act of revenge.
That's a fantastic line,
I
that,
mean,
and it's
it's nice in a way. I mean, nice, but it's apt in a way because she does get a vengeance on him. She gets a very material, visceral vengeance on him. Interesting that disappears in some of the American versions.
oh,
But in those, the one that Andy sings, which is pretty much the standard version with a little bit lopped off the front, it usually has a setting verse, which I don't think Andy sings. In Fair Worcester City, in Fair Worcestershire, a charming young dame.
that's right.
He gets on with the plot, sort of thing, in his version.
But I think what I meant by fantastic in the line is just appreciating it from a linguistic standpoint.
Yeah,
I think as well because ripped him, she stripped him, Dormin three. You got that internal rhyme of
yeah,
ripped and
yeah,
stripped,
yeah,
which is
yeah.
really catchy.
Yes, I don't know exactly how late that comes in, but it's certainly there. The whole
Yeah,
idea of him being torn apart by her, very physically visceral revenge, is I think
yeah.
new in the 19th century, and I think that's
And
interesting.
also, yeah, tore him in three. I mean, if you're strong enough to tear someone in half because you've got two hands, but how
So,
did she tear him in three? Did she have a third hand?
supernatural power. I don't
Okay,
know.
supernatural. We're going with supernatural power. That's fair
I
enough.
think we have to,
But just as a construct of a line, it's really fantastic. She
Yeah,
ripped him. She stripped him. She tore him in
yeah, it does
three.
vary that
That,
line. I mean, but
that's proper horror movie stuff.
it is
That's
horror
great. I
movie
love it.
stuff, Yeah, it is. But so is her seeing the grave when they're riding in the dark. That's an awful
The
moment.
reveal that he's
Yeah,
already dug her grave.
yeah,
Yeah, he's
yeah.
planned
So
this.
there's
Yeah.
no sense in which this is a crime. He's got angry with her and a crime of passion. It's
No, no.
he's going to do what he's intended to do away with her from the time he comes. Says you must come and see. Sometimes it's to see friends or some pleasure to have or something. But it's that sort of idea.
Yeah.
And there we are.
So that's that 11 verses is essentially the version known as the Cruel Ship's Carpenter,
Yeah,
isn't it?
it
That's
is.
the
Yeah, yeah,
main,
it is. That's the main title for that, as opposed to the
yeah,
Gosport Tragedy,
because
which
that's
is
the
the
original.
the
Yeah.
early version. Yeah, I think that's the useful title. Worth saying something about the ghosts. I mean, I've done some work on ghosts.
I mean, at some point in the future on the Patreon, I do want to do a whole episode with you on
All
ghosts.
right, okay.
But nevertheless, we can to talk a bit now.
Well, we
But
can just. I mean, just
yeah,
I
yeah,
got interested in ghosts because in traditional songs there seem to be two sorts of ghosts. There's the violent, vindictive sort of ghost who's really got it in for you, and they're not going to let you go. And there's also the kindly, the friendly, the lover's ghost idea. They're quite different
yeah.
sorts of things. And I, my original idea is that the earlier ones were the violent ghosts, and the later ones were the loving ghost, the benign ghost comes in the 18th century. Given that I now think this violent ghost starts in perhaps the late 18th, early 19th century, maybe that chronology is not quite right. But they do seem. I mean, the ghosts are wonderful. There's some great. When I looked at some of the. Sometimes the ghost takes the person away to hell. There's a nice one here called "The Patient Wife Betrayed," and she says, uh, um, "Because thou hast betrayed my life, thou shalt with me away." And then his friends are looking at him. She whops him off to hell, basically. That sort of thing happens. You do get the
Yeah.
physical thing. The ghosts. The ghosts in a song called "The Pining Maid." She says, "A small time after appeared in my sight his ghastly ghost that loved me and did me sore affright, and groaning cried, Now I do come for my own heart's delight." They're very threatening, these ghosts. They're not like the
No, yeah.
My Love Willie in the Night Visit songs, just totally different.
That's right. It's complete. Yeah, I'm more familiar with songs about the nice loving ghosts, like night visiting songs, and things like it's similar things, the Holland Handkerchief and that
Yeah,
sort of
yeah.
song.
No, that really fits the night visiting songs type of thing, the Holland
Yeah,
Handkerchief, I think. Yeah.
but that ends up being spooky rather than romantic in the
Yeah,
end.
it is spooky, but it's quite child hated that song. But I think it's quite effective. I was remember Packy Burns singing that, absolutely wonderful.
Oh, that's right. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's the Packy Manus Burn. That's the one.
yeah.
So this song, as well as Cool Ship's Carpenter 11 verses sort of thing, you said this ended up quite very very popular in America as Pretty Polly.
Yeah, let's just pause before that because there seem to be there's some parallel versions, and these are just indications of the popularity of the song. Not only are there parallel versions, there's a song called the Sailor and the Ghost, and there's a song called Molly Betrayed, or the Fogbound Ship. Um, they become, again, Steve Gardner is good on this. They become parodied. Now, if a thing is popular enough to be parodied, you've got a real index of its popularity. But Sam Cowell does a musical version of this, sending it up. Now, in order to do that, people have got to know the original. They've got to know the genre
Yeah,
from which it comes. So I think it's interesting that the song is parodied, and and almost undermined in a way, because that really does indicate that the song is it's got a real hold in popular imagination. People know what you're singing about, otherwise there wouldn't be any sort of bother. They wouldn't do it at all.
yeah.
So I think that's interesting. Yeah, it goes to America. It gets printed in America, and it gets shortened in America.
Ah, yeah.
Some of the early versions are just like the English versions, and I think some of those do survive in tradition in the USA. They're just like the sort of 11 verse Cruel Ship's Carpenter, but I think some elements, some of the older versions get over there as well. But by the late 19th century, I think we first have evidence of, if you like, a third lease of life of this song, and that is Pretty Polly, which is a really pared down version. The form has changed. Instead of the 4 verse ballad form, it becomes almost a blues form. I courted Pretty Polly the livelong night. I courted Pretty Polly the livelong night, and left her next morning before it was light. It becomes 2 lines and a payoff line. That's blues. I mean, in terms of the format of it, but it
So,
becomes
so is this now from the point of the song is from the point of view of the Carpenter now
Oh, point
in
of view
Pretty Polly
is,
one?
we could go back and go over the whole thing from point of view. The point of view in songs is a really interesting subject area because it shifts. It shifts the
Yeah,
point of view. Um,
because I'm looking at a version of the Courtship's Carpenter I used to sing, and that's it's in the third person. So,
yeah,
but
but
the
is it
Pretty
is it
Polly
all in
that
the
sounds
third
like.
person? Uh,
Let's have a look. Let's have a look.
uh, I mean, there is some quoted speech as well, isn't there?
Oh yes, but nevertheless, I think all the narration is
Right.
all the
Okay.
narrated bits are third person, whereas what you just said of Pretty Polly, at least that's first
No,
person.
no, it's both because I courted Pretty Polly, so that's the first person, and then he led her through groves and through valleys
Oh,
through
I
things.
see.
So it does
Okay,
shift.
fine.
I mean, that is very common in popular song, traditional song, that there is no. This is why, sort of austere poets would say, "Oh, it's terrible," because you often get this shift of perspective, shift of who. What are you viewing this from? Is it a narrative vision? Is it an insider's vision? Very few songs. There are some dialogue songs that are purely that, but they're the rarity. There's often, I would, off the top of my head, I would say there's more often a shift in focus, which includes the first person and degree of
Right.
dialogue and some sort of extra outside narrative which carries the thing along. So this is obviously, I think it's evolved from this older song, but I think mostly evolved orally. And in
Oh,
the
sorry, from the Gosport tragedy.
yeah, but from that's complicated. Some people have really looked at the text in a way that I haven't. Seem to think there are elements of both in some of the oral versions. And the oral versions themselves are evolving and elements are coming in, although the structure of the thing remains the same. Um, but Pretty Polly, I mean, it's recorded 3 or 4 times in the late 1920s. There's this great boom of quotation marks hillbilly music, and you get recordings by Doc Boggs and John Hammond in the late 1920s, and these become fundamental because these are important milestones. The song is now in the recorded era, and then later on you get all sorts of people. In the folk revival and so on. This song is well known, and it just has a life that carries on, to keep the thing going. But yeah, so it's circulating widely, and there are loads and loads of recordings of Pretty Polly is the third generic name we can use. I called it Pretty Polly the Livelong Night, and that is. stripped down to an enormous degree.
And so it's is that the change then from because in Gospel Tragedy she's Molly.
Yeah, there's that Molly. Although there are some Molly versions of Pretty Polly, and that is a common. I mean, don't get too hung up on these sort of little shifts of language. You know, William, Willie, Molly, Polly. These things happen.
Well, I guess
Um,
Polly it's alliterative with the word pretty, isn't it? It's a
yeah,
snappy
yeah, but
title.
yeah, once you bring Polly in, you take the pretty with it. You see, I mean,
Yeah,
that's the trouble there. But yeah, so Polly is a common name. Molly's certainly there in the early versions, and
yeah, and you get Polly in other seafaring songs, don't you? Like High Germany's "Oh Polly, Love My Polly." It's quite a common. It seems quite a common name for sailors' sweethearts in songs and that sort of
yeah,
stuff. Polly.
it's almost to the extent that William and Mary, Polly and William, these are generic ballad characters almost. You know, if you've got a ballad character, then you call them one of those names. So I wouldn't get too hung up on that. That's not to me what's really interesting or important. Yeah, so I mean, let's think about the three stages and the endings of the song. In the earliest versions, it's the ghost seems to drive the man mad, and he seems to die in a fever or high excitement on board the ship. In the cruel ship's carpenter, the later versions, it seemed there's this wonderful stuff about ripping in three, so the vengeance of the ghost is foregrounded. In the Pretty Polly, the most common version seems to be a debt. You know, he covers her up so safe and secure, and leaves her to the birds to, just goes off. And then it just goes, a debt to the devil young William must pay for murdering Pretty Polly and running away. So there's none of that vengeance, there's none of that retribution, but there is the threat of hell. That's the most common ending of the Pretty Polly versions that I've come across.
Right.
And
Okay.
so
Yeah.
you do get those three different endings that are quite significant. But
Yeah.
I think that the ballad never loses that notion of the premeditated murder. I mean, he's dug her grave. He takes her to the grave. She sees the grave. That is probably it's pretty chilling stuff anyway. But that's probably the most chilling thing about the song in a way.
It's a bit of a plot twist, but it's earlier in the song rather than
Yeah,
you normally get a twist at the end of stuff, but that's a big shock factor moment
yeah.
of that, I think, isn't it? Yeah.
Polly, pretty Polly, you've guessed about right. I dug on your grave best part of last night. That is really chilling.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the version I used to do, that was in the Wanton Seed book, from the EFTSS. Oh, it's over two verses, I think, because you get the he led. This is the Cruel Ship's Carpenter one rather than Pretty
Mhm.
Polly or anything.
Yeah.
He led her through groves and valleys so deep, which caused this young damsel to sigh and to weep. O William, you have led me astray, on purpose my innocent life to betray. It is true, these words he did say, for all the long night I've been digging your grave, the grave it being opened, the spade standing by. Implies he's only just finished
He's only
digging it,
just finished and he's left the spade there so he can cover her up. I mean, that is horrible, isn't it?
the spade standing by, which caused this young damsel to sigh and to cry. And then you get Polly pleading for her life,
Mm.
etc. But yeah, so it's a big moment.
Yeah, yeah,
And I
indeed.
love that detail about the spade standing by.
It
That's
is.
great.
It is really. It is really. It sort of brings it home in a way, doesn't it? How awful the act is, and
Mm,
how how premeditated it is.
yeah,
It's not a
absolutely.
crime of passion. It's a crime of, this guy's
Planning. Yeah.
has planned it because she's got pregnant and he doesn't want her and he doesn't want the responsibility of the child and so on.
Anything else you want
Well,
to talk
there's a
about?
number of things. I mean, there's a wider idea of the murdered sweetheart ballads, of which this is a prime example.
Oh yeah.
and the social implications. So shall we talk about that and then maybe talk about the tunes a bit? I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah, go for it.
there's a I think a wonderful guy, Tom Pettit, who's a retired professor of the South Denmark University, but he's English. He lives in Denmark, and he's done a whole set of studies on this subject of the murdered sweetheart, and he sees them as going right the way through uh, from the 17th century really through to the the folk song collection period, and it's this is a an outlier in certain ways because it is the death at the end, the death of the male actor is usually violent or we don't know it. In most of them, it's a criminal proceedings. He's caught and hung. But I mean, the significance to me, his work is really worth reading because he's done a whole gazetteer. I mean, he's very careful worker. He's done a whole gazetteer of these ballads, and that's available online, and he's looked at the plots and the implications of the different songs. And But it's worth thinking about the social implications of why this song has purchase, why people are interested in it, because that position of um, the precarious nature of being a young woman in that society is, I think, really significant. Um, I mean, unmarried young women in pre-industrial and early industrial society didn't have it easy. You know, you were supposed to get married. On the other hand, and have children, and you would be punished in various ways for uh, not, not obeying the. It wasn't. I mean, like today, I think 50% of people get married and 50% don't. Something like that. It's very unusual not to be married and have and still have children. So you've got to think of a society in which there's that strong emphasis on the prohibition of sexual activity before marriage. I mean, that is uh, I mean, Robert Burns in Scotland, I know, but he ended up in the cutty stool, the stool of repentance in church, and you were punished in church for being a fornicator. In England, it was the poor law that got you because if the father of your child wouldn't support you, you had to go in the workhouse, you had to go in the parish union, and so it was difficult. So these songs have a sort of purchase, a sort of grasp on mortality because any that could you could be William, any young woman could be Polly if you let yourself be seduced, if you let yourself go away. So the songs to me are the whole of the murdered sweetheart ballads say that that they're signposts, they're warnings, they're don't get into a fix like this because this is what happens. But because they're about crossing boundaries, because they're about breaking prohibitions, that we're always interested in that. We're always interested in you know what the um, rule is, and we only know what the rule is in a funny way by having it broken. And so we can contemplate through a song like this and many other songs like this. Um, it, we get to think these issues, these social important issues through. I mean, in this case, and in all the murdered sweetheart ballads, it's really much worse than that. The girl is not only putting herself in danger through uh, premarital pregnancy. Pregnancy itself is dangerous enough in the 18th century. In some parts of the world, 1 in 3 women die in giving birth. And child mortality rates are enormous. But also, you're actually putting yourself in danger of being done away with. So there's a sense in which this song is a warning. And that's brought home very clearly by the moral verses that exist in some of the at the end of the ballads. But even without those, the songs have that sort of function. We think of the Whittam Miller or songs like that, where he pushes the woman into the water and that sort of thing. So um, I think this is an interesting genre. I think it ties up with um, other sort of songs, and it ties up with the whole situation of people's social lives in the 18th into the early 19th century. I mean, you've got this strange situation where marriage rates, I mean, everybody, if they live long enough, gets married pretty much. Few people don't. They don't get married till late. Average marriage age in the 18th century is something like 26, 27. It's not 18, 19. So you have a 10-year period between puberty and um, sort of married status, when sex is legitimate, when in a sense it's not allowed, and that itself can give rise to problems and frustration. So I think there's a whole tension within the society. One of I remember some guy, Shirley Collins, in front of an audience, and this guy made some sexual comment about one of the songs she'd sang, and Shirley turned around and said, "Oh, it's always those who aren't getting it who talk about it all the time." And I think you can widen that. I think you can widen that. That the songs, the fact that so many English songs feature sex may not be anything to do with sex being rampant. It may be to do with sex not being rampant. You see what I mean? That you could argue it that way around, and I
Yeah,
have
of
done in.
course. Yeah, that's an interesting angle, I suppose. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
that's good. That's good.
Well, there we are. So
Something to ponder on.
something to ponder on. Yes. What else? Shall we say something about the tunes?
Absolutely, the
Oh,
tunes.
well, we know the earliest one went to this older tune, which is one of the reasons we suggest it's a broadside creation. Uh, Nice tune, but I don't do it, and I've never heard a reconstruction. Someone will do it now if they hear this podcast. They'll come up and sing the 35 verses and to the tune of
That's
Peggy's
probably
Overseen.
me, I think.
Well, there you go. You want to bore your audience silly, you can do that.
Yeah, yeah. I already do with, lots of Gordon Hall ballads, so it's fine.
Gordon would have done it, wouldn't he? Gordon would have
Yeah,
certainly have
probably
done
would
it.
actually. Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
Surprised he didn't.
some versions go to, it seems to fit to Villikins and his Diner, and I think that's a 19th century thing. Henry Burstow's tune is a Villikins tune, and some of the ones I looked at certainly have Villikins elements in them. But it does seem to, like a lot of broadside songs that are, where a dominant amount of the transmission takes place through broadsides. I think the singers, in a sense, they don't make up the tune, that they use a tune that or some version of a tune or melodic fragments to make the song. Harry Cox, for example, his tune is a version of Green Bushes. I think there's no doubt about that.
Oh yeah,
Other tunes are different. Uh, as I say, the Villikins in common. The interesting thing is once, and this may be to do with sound recording, once the Pretty Polly becomes established in the USA, the tune pretty much uh, stays very similar in both form and tune. And it's in a sense, we could call it quite a primitive tune because it just bases itself. If you listen to the Stanley Brothers recording, which is sort of proto bluegrass sort of recording, they play the chord of A, I think, all the way through. They don't change chord at all. And so it's sort of, because it's da 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 dee dee da dee da 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 dee da, the same phrase, just a little bit out da da dee dee da dee da dee da da da, and then a concluding da 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 dee da da dee da da da. It really can all go on one chord, which is very
right.
very different from other tunes that have implicit chord changes within them.
Yeah, that doesn't. That's not. In not very similar, but it's got similarities with the one I used to sing that's in the Wanton Seed book because that's a
That's an
um
interesting tune.
yeah because it's E minor Dorian
No,
mode.
it's not. No,
Um,
it's not. You're saying that because it ends on an E.
because it says it in the book.
Oh,
It
it's
says it.
bollocks. That's Frank. That's Frank Purslow.
Yeah, I
He,
know.
he didn't know what he was at. Um,
It's in D major, but it ends on an E. It ends
that's
on an
right.
E.
That's a better analysis. That
There you
is an
go.
interesting
Yeah.
analysis. It's in a D major. Dum da dum da dee dum dum da dum dum da. That's pure D
That's
major. Da da dee
Yeah.
da 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 dee. Now that's a bit flirting with the relative minor. Da da dee da 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 dee da da da. There's D. There's your tonic. Yeah. Da dee da da dee da da dee da dum da. It hangs. It hangs, that tune. It hangs on that
Which
E.
is why Frank Purslow wrote E Dorian.
Yeah, well, that's the sort of, if you've seen any of my discussions with people, there's not a mechanistic way of deciding the mode of a tune. There isn't, because if you look at the all most tunes imply a chordal structure, even if they're a single line melody, they imply a chordal structure. Dum
Yeah.
da dum da dee da da da. That's all the chord of D. Da dum D. And that implies to me chord five. Da da dee da 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 dum dee da da dum da. That's the sixth note of the scale. That implies a sort of B minor-ish. That's the relative minor of D major. Then an almost repeated phrase. Da da dee da 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 dee da da da. That's the keynote. That's D. Dum da dum dum da. There's that chord of D minor, D major again. Da 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 dee da 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 dum dee da. It's your keynote. It is a
Yeah,
keynote.
yeah,
It's
yeah, yeah.
just decides to. I love those tunes that do that. There's quite a few that hang on the second note of the scale, but it doesn't mean,
No.
because it's got an F sharp and ends on an
And a C
E.
sharp.
It
Yeah,
ends
yeah.
on an E. It doesn't mean it's in D minor Dorian. Because its structure, its
Yeah, yeah.
feeling is D major that happens to end on a open chord on the second note of the scale. So I'd argue, I've had a lot of arguments with people who want to classify. If you look on the list that we subscribed to recently, I have these. I try to be kindly discussions with people who want to classify things. Classification isn't the answer. Description is the best thing. This is a tune which is mostly in D major, but just just unsettled itself by not ending on the keynote, and that seems to be an interesting way to look at it.
I know because there are actually for the melody for that melody that's written out in the Wanton Seed book, it does actually have some suggested chords for it,
Yeah.
and it very much every time a line ends on the E, the second of the scale, they've written an E minor chord in to make it. And I remember when I arranged this when I sang it with the trio I was in back when I was like 15, 16 years old. Certainly at the end of the fourth line, the end of the verse, and he to his trade was a ship's carpenter. We definitely made that into chord five rather than chord two because it sounds so much more natural that way. And even back then we thought, what is this rubbish? These chords written
Oh,
out.
there's a lot of rubbish in book. If it were a Dorian tune in E minor, you would have the E should be much more emphasized.
Yeah, because it's only there at the end
It's
of the
only there at the
lines.
end of the line. It needs to be centered on that. You need to. I mean, a keynote has to be. You have to feel a gravity towards it. You have to feel that that's where you're going to repose. And to me, that tune is in D, and it happens to end on an E. There's some people call these circular tunes in that they imply that you're going to go on to the next one. Tune like
Carry on, yeah.
Dargerson in play dum da dum ba dum ba diddly da da dum da dum da diddly da da dum da dee da diddly dee da dum da dee da diddly. Note two of the scale it ends on da da da. And then you have to go on to it
Yeah,
pushes you
yeah.
back into the tune again. So I think that's a. Uh, I think we're going to do Elsie Marley in a little while. You think this is interesting? Elsie Marley is even more interesting.
That's right. Elsie Marley is coming up on the Patreon. Where are we? We're gonna head to where we've. So actually, yeah, Elsie Marley. If you're listening to this episode of Courtship's Carpenter on the day it comes out, then last Thursday we had the episode with Vic and Nancy Kerr on Elsie Marley. So we've already had that. We've already had that discussion in terms of the timeline. So
No, tunes are interesting. Tunes are interesting, but you don't want to get. I really think it's because we can use a term like Dorian mode as a descriptive term, but you know just because it consists of a certain notes, it doesn't. It depends how the tune is arranged, how the tune is set up as to which mode it's in.
yeah, yeah.
So description is better than classification. Classification won't get you
Indeed.
very far, really.
No. Shall we move on to the some traditional versions?
Yeah, sure.
Is that where we're at?
Certainly.
What have you got for us, Vic?
Well, I had a look at the Vaughan Williams website and it's wonderful. There's about half a dozen pretty interesting ones there in terms of English renditions of the piece. God bless him, Harry Cox, of course, had a
Oh
wonderful
yeah.
repertoire of songs with as I say, here's to me, I hear it as a tune related to green bushes. Dum 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 dee da dee dum da da dee da 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 dee dum. I hear it's related to that. But Sam Larner, who lived a bit just not too far away in East Anglia, he has a tune related to Villikens's Diner, which I talked about earlier. So that's sort of interesting. The tunes do seem to vary a lot. It's only when you get to America that they seem to standardize, and maybe that's to do with sound recording. I don't know. That's interesting.
Right.
The great performance I really discovered, I'd heard it before, but I hadn't realized how good it was, is the gypsy singer Wiggy Smith. Uh,
Oh yeah, yeah,
Recording
absolutely.
that's on the Vaughan Williams Memorial Library website online. Lovely, lovely, measured, big, sort of almost open-hearted performance of the song. I really thought that was one of the interesting discoveries. I noticed one of the really interesting ones. Maybe we can post. I've sent you a link to it. The Pearl Nye version that's over two web pages, an American one, but that seems to me to have elements of the English, older English versions in it that uh, are there. Um, Now, once you get to, I think a lot of revival performers have performed the song. I mean, always like Mike Waterston singing. Waterston's Carthy did it, and there are various others that I think you've noticed, haven't you? That
Yeah, yeah. I just wanted to say the just for clarification that the Wiggy Smith one version is on a CD, isn't it? The Musical Traditions Records label did a whole album, a whole CD of Wiggy Smith and the Smith family, other Smith family members,
yeah,
Wiggy and Wisdom and Denny. And I'm pretty sure there's recordings there of Wiggy and Denny
yeah,
singing it.
Denny. I prefer Wiggy's version, but I mean it's all interesting. If you're interested in the song, you're
Yeah,
interested in.
I'm just looking at that. Denny singing it lasts 2 minutes 46, and Wiggy Smith's one 4 minutes 37.
Now there's a proper singer, you see.
Whether he's singing it just naturally singing slower or whether
I
there's
think the
more
versions are
verses,
slightly different.
they're slightly different.
Interesting when that's members of the same family, isn't it?
That's very interesting when you get that. Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely.
really
And the
something.
Sam Lana one is on that he well that's I don't know whether that was his name for it or not,
Hmm.
but it's called the Ghost Ship, isn't it? On
Yeah,
that,
yeah.
that's on
That's
this.
one of the other 19th century titles. That gets confused with another ballad as well. There are these different the Sailor and the Ghost. There are some other ballads crop up in the 19th century that tell roughly the same story, but they're not quite the same as this.
Okay.
But they're interesting.
But and the Sam Lana that's on the album you can buy on CD called Now Is the Time
That's
for
Time for
Fishing.
Fishing, which are the McCall Seeger recordings done in the late 50s, I think.
Right, yeah.
Uh,
And Harry Cox is on volume 17, Ballads of the Voice of the
mm,
People. I think that's called, but that's as Harry mostly had the first lines of songs as title, so it's called In Worcester City.
yeah.
But it's
And
which is
that was the common title on the that was the common first verse on the broadsheet versions.
right,
Fair
okay.
Worcester City in
And that
front.
brings in confusion with some versions of Poison and a
Yeah,
Glass of
that's
Wine
right.
because
Yeah,
that
yeah,
because
yeah.
Joseph Taylor called that in Worcester
Worcester
City.
City. Yeah,
So suddenly that's when even first lines get you into a bit of deep
absolutely.
water and a
Which is
bit
why
of
you
trouble
need the
there.
Roud index, which is
There we go.
because
That's why you need the
given
route
the unique
index.
Roud numbers, people still get it wrong. I saw something. I saw looking at this stuff. I saw that someone had given this Roud number to a totally disconnected song. I can't remember.
Yeah, it
It
happens. It
happens, you know.
happens.
I
So
noticed
that's yeah.
your friend Carl Sinfield. But
Oh yeah.
I'll give you I'll give you a link in the email. Uh, Put up a whole set of recordings. I think he just drawn them together from uh, from different parts of the internet. On the cruise ship's Carpenter, there's quite a lot of interesting stuff there. You know, Steel Eye Span and
Yeah, I'm just looking at the page for that in Sing Yonder Volume 2. Yeah, because we got yeah, Waterson Carthy, Steel S Band, Mike Waterson.
and it is quite useful to have a whole set together like that. You know, includes Shirley Collins. I see they recorded it, and um,
Yeah, absolutely.
there's one that's unidentified. I think it's the Doc Boggs. It's on the World Primitive Music. Gene Ritchie singing it. Gene Ritchie, great ballad
Yeah,
singer. Some
yeah,
good
great.
stuff there. Doc Boggs, Stanley Brothers. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's a good Jeannie Robertson.
Yes, that's interesting. This. I take it it's an Irish version.
Yeah, because it's labeled, it's called Miss Brown of Dublin
Yes,
City.
that's right. But once you get into the song, there's a lot of ship's carpenter verses there. It's only short. It's only
Yeah,
four verses, but do you know what I mean?
that's right. It was sung to Hamish Henderson and Jean Ritchie, and I got Mainie Norfolk puts a bit of sleeve notes from it saying four verses. All verses have four lines except verse three, which has only two mismatched lines. There are generally five verses in this Irish song, with the last verse missing in this performance. So it's a bit of an odd mixture
It
one that, but
is,
yeah.
but Julia Robertson always commands your attention through the stately nature of her singing. I think that's
Absolutely.
what she did.
And then I would highlight the two members of the Brazel family, the Gloucestershire Gypsy Travellers, Weenie Brazel and Danny Brazel. Weenie Brazel sang it to Hamish Henderson in 1955, and Danny Brazel sang it to Pete Shepherd, our good friend Pete Shepherd, in Gloucester in 1966, and they're both on the Musical Traditions CD called "Down by the Old Riverside," which is a whole mass. I think it's three discs. It's three discs with about 25 tracks
It's
each
wonderful.
of recording to the Brazel family.
I had it on iPod in the days one had iPods, and when I was going to work commuting, and used to listen. They're great versions of the songs, often very complete versions of the songs, not the fragmentary ones you get amongst young latter day
That's
singers.
right. I'm just going through the track listing trying to find Cruel Ship's Carpenter. There we go. They're the first two tracks on track two on disc two. Danny Brazel's one lasts 2 minutes 53, and Weenie Brazel's one lasts 7 minutes.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. Proper ballad singing.
I highly recommend the Brazel family in general, but the Cruel Ship's Carpenter. And the last one I was going to bring up was, I think, Irish again, Paddy McCluskey,
Yeah.
which is Peter Kennedy and Sean O'Boyle recorded him singing Young Willie in 1955. And that fragments, because of the way those album series worked, fragment bits of his verses are included in the track of that song on the Folk Songs of Britain, Volume
That's
7.
awful, that bloody editing, the cutting the songs up, isn't it? I mean, that was a real.
Yeah, it's his singing without verses 1, 3, and
I
4.
know it's just terrible. I mean, it's just. And I had this idea about showing connections. Fine, do it in a lecture, but on a bloody gramophone record. I mean, that just seems to be stupid. There we are.
Yeah, so you can hear bits of his singing on that if you've got access to the various folk songs of Britain 10 album compilation anthology thing. Then it's on volume
Yeah,
7, which Seedman put out in 61, and then Topic put it out in 1970 as well.
yeah.
And there's some sleeve notes for that as well. Is there anything there that we haven't covered already? That's just the plot, American variants. The notes on the Folk Songs of Britain Volume 7 page do talk about the theme of the murder of the innocent and pregnant girl by the lover gave rise to many indigenous American ballads, Pretty Polly, The Knoxville Girl, Hattie Stout, Down in the Lone Green Valley, all that sort of thing.
Yeah, but I really dispute that they're indigenous. You see, they're American development. Well, Knoxville Girl. It's not the. It's an Irish song.
I can't remember who wrote the sleeve notes for this, but it says they wrote, "This was certainly the most popular domestic folk ballad subject in Middle America during the 19th century." Is what whoever wrote it has written there.
Sounds like Peter Kennedy, doesn't it?
Well, I mean, it was him and Sean O'Ball that recording
Yeah.
those songs, so it could well have been Peter Kennedy. And Paddy McCluskey was 73 years old when he sang that, and that was in Fair Worcester City in Fair Worcestershire.
Let's just make some allowances. It was 60, 70 years ago that was written, wasn't it? I
Yes,
mean,
that's true. Yeah, yeah.
and the state of knowledge was not the same. But like a lot of people, Peter Kennedy sometimes came out with these wide generalizations that didn't hold true.
Indeed, indeed.
The Knoxville Guys, a similar Murdered Sweetheart ballad. The Louvain brothers recording of that is fabulous.
Is it? I love the
Just
Louvin brothers.
just the way they could sing together. Just that's just an aside recommendation. Louvain brothers, Knoxville Girl. What a fabulous track.
Well, the Louvin brothers in general, they did quite a lot
Yeah,
of that sort
yeah,
of thing.
yeah,
I
indeed.
remember, can't remember who it was. A friend of my dad's once gave him a CD compilation they had made of as many versions of Mary on the Wild Moor as they could find. It was a Mary on the Wild Moor CD, uh, and that was the Louvin brothers and Johnny Cash and I think because my dad and Will Duke used to do it.
Yeah, yeah.
Mare on the Wild Moor, which is Roud's number 155. So in the next sort of 7 or 8 years, I'll be coming to that one. But it's then so and the Louvin brothers did it. We were very impressed with the Louvin brothers version of Mare on the Wild Moor.
Yeah, they were fabulous singers.
Yeah, great stuff. So the recommendations for us, we got quite a few. We've got members of the Brazel family, Weenie and Danny. We've got members of the Smith family, Wiggy and Denny, Harry Cox, Sam Lana, Jeannie Robertson, Pearl Nye, and Paddy McCluskey. The other one I wanted to mention was George Dunn had it as well.
Yeah, his version a bit fragmentary. It wasn't very
what
complete,
a great
but
singer, George
yeah,
Dunn.
yeah.
And there was the Leader LP, which is not on. I don't know why I mentioned that. There's a Leader LP of George Dunn stuff, but then Musical Traditions label again released Chainmaker, which is 2 discs, and it's on there. The Cruel Ship's Carpenter, 3 minutes long, so that's probably going to be a relatively standard version or standard length version. I'll put links to all of those in the episode notes, and I'll play clips from some of those.
Just got one other suggestion. Looking through the stuff, the material, I came across William Tucker's version in musical notation. It's in the Sharp collection. Great tune. If I didn't know the song already and I wanted to learn a new version of it, I'd go for that tune. Fabulous tune.
Oh, okay.
Never
William
heard
Tucker.
it. William Tucker, not a singer I've particularly heard of in Sharp's connection either. William Tucker of Ashcott. But I've never heard anybody perform it. So you want a nice thing for your repertoire. If you're a young singer, that would be a good one to try.
There you go. Fantastic. Right. I think we better bring this to a close.
I think we rambled long enough.
Rambled long enough.
There's a lot of rambling to do, though.
Indeed so. Indeed so. Plenty of it's if there's information there, this is the format for it. Great. Okay. Well, yeah. Thanks very much for doing that, and always a pleasure to have you. We've just had you on the Patreon for an episode of Elsie Marley with Nancy Kerr. We'll see you later. We're once more in this season of In the Roud for Roud 19. If anyone wants to look that up in advance, we'll have Vic back for the history of Roud 19. But for now, though, Vic Gammon, thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. Bye-bye.
A huge thanks again to Vic Gammon for providing us with the history of the Cruel Ship's Carpenter. We're now at the halfway point in the episode, so we'll just take a few minutes and listen to a few different versions of this song sung by traditional singers. So what you're going to hear now are snippets of The Ghost Ship from Sam Lana, Young Willie from Paddy McCluskey, Miss Brown of Dublin City from Jeannie Robertson, and then 3 versions of The Cruel Ship's Carpenter from George Dunn, Mrs. Charlie Noel, and Weenie Brazel.
Now the Queen, she wants sailors to sail on the sea, which made pretty Polly stouter to bleed, saying, William, dear William, don't you go to sea. Remember the vows that you made unto me. Now 'twas early next morning before it was day. He went to his Polly, these words he did say, saying, Polly, pretty Polly, you must come along with me. Before we are married, my friends for to see.
Fair ones are shining on foreigners in town. Their love at a young dancer, her name was Miss Brown. She courted the young worldie, her darling to be. As Tate's name and Saturday, gosh, Carpenter had been. Early one morning before it broke day, a voice come to the window and unto her did say, Rise up, lovely Mary, and come along with me. Before you get married, our friends we must see.
In Dublin's fair city, in Dublin's fair town, in Dublin's fair city, there lived Thomas Brown, for she courted a sailor for 7 long years, and from the beginning he called her his dear.
2 brace of kisses I had late last night, to rise up in the morning before it was light. Oh pardon, oh pardon, said she. Da, la, da, I'll travel the wide world to set myself free, if you will but pardon my baby and me.
Molly, oh Molly, said he, will you a green molly get married to me? William, William, said she, I am too young, William, too young to marry you.
'Twas fair London city, 'twas near Worcestershire. I courted a young man to make him my dear. I courted a young man for to make him my dear. And him by his trade was a ship carpenter. Early one morning, by the dawn of the day, straight away to his Polly's bedroom he had strayed, saying, Polly, dear Polly, you must go with me. Long before we get married, our friends for to see.
And you can find the links to all those tracks and the albums from which they came in the show notes. On to the second half of the episode. I spoke with singer Andy Turner about his history with folk music, his blog, A Folk Song a Week, and of course about the cruel ship's carpenter. Hello, Andy Turner. Welcome to In the Roud.
Hello, Matt. Good to see you.
Yeah, it is very great to have you on. I know you've been listening since the beginning, haven't you, to this?
Indeed, I've learned plenty. Yes.
Yes, as have I. And I hope everyone else is learning too, as well as enjoying. But yeah, it's great to have you. We've known each other a long time. It seems it probably is a long time.
I think it is. I think it is. Yes. I don't know how old you were, but I remember seeing you first, I think, at the Thursday night Lewis Folk Club.
Oh, at the Royal Oak in Lewis, the Royal Oak Folk Club.
Used to play there with Matt Green fairly regularly before it closed down. So yeah,
that's right. I must have been there doing floor spots or just sitting under a table or something. But yeah, I was into it, and then I've been in the band with you now for about 10 years as well now. It seems.
Well, it's longer than that. It's 12 years, and if we're lucky, we might have done a dozen gigs in that time. But as you know, I was about to say we've just got a new one, but we had to turn it down because we couldn't find a date to suit. But yes,
that's right.
Gecko's still going.
Geckos,
to everyone's surprise.
Geckos, the Cayley band Geckos, which, yes, I'm the most 12 years as of 12 years ago. I'm the most recent member, aren't I? Yeah, so. I was recruited, which was very nice of you, I must say, and I've had a great time.
Yeah.
But yes, it's not a thing that gigs regularly.
It's an occasional band, it has to be said.
It's like one a year, and then once we did a New Year's Eve gig, which went into the next year, so that was our one gig for both years, I think.
Unfortunately, it turned out that way, but yeah, no, they keep coming in,
and then we just had an offer for next February, and I was the only one that couldn't do the date. And it's the only date I wasn't free for as well. So that's the way diaries go sometimes. Yeah, never mind. I look forward to a gig with you in 2026 or 2025.
No, 2025. Maybe. Let's keep hopeful.
Let's do one next year. Let's do one next year. Anyway, how have you been recently? I think we saw each other at Whitby Folk Week.
I mean, Whitby's. It was a little while ago now, but yes, I had a good time there with. Again, playing with Matt Green, and then at the end of the week with Magpie Lane, which was great because that's the first time we've been to the festival as the full band.
That's brilliant.
Really enjoyed meeting and hearing some singers I'd not come across, particularly Francie Devine and Michal and Benry Quinn. Who were just fantastic singers from the Northern Irish tradition. Even though they live in the Republic, they're definitely in the Northern Irish tradition, aren't they? In the way they sing. So that was really, really good.
Yes, and I that was a particularly good gig at the end of on the last day on the Friday afternoon at the Metropole Ballroom, because that was I would consider that a star-studded, stacked lineup, because it was Alistair Anderson, Brian Peters, Magpie Lane, and Holly Clark and the Reavers.
Yeah,
and that was a particularly good afternoon, I must say.
Yeah. Yes. We had a really good time. And since then, I've retired. I've given up the day job.
Congratulations!
And now throwing myself. Bizarrely, I don't seem to be doing any more singing and playing at the moment, but I'm doing lots of transcribing songs collected in Kent and then writing about the people that sang them. This is my big retirement project. A smaller version of the Sussex Traditions project, but just purely on the basis that there were not nearly so many singers recorded or had songs noted from them from Kent as from Sussex.
Sure.
But yeah, I'm spending a lot of time on that at the moment.
Oh, well, excellent. I may have to put you to use on the Patreon side of In the Roud at some point when it comes to
possibly.
Kent.
Yeah, you could do a Kent special.
I do have plans because we've just done the Patreon's only been out for a week now, But we've had a spotlight episode on the collecting work of Sabin Baring Gould.
Yeah.
And that's the first spotlight episode, and that's the collector spotlight. We're going to do singer spotlight episodes where we focus on one singer, traditional singer, but I'm also going to do the occasional region spotlight episodes and do get someone in to look at the collecting work that went on in particular regions of the country or the world. So
yeah, I should be able to help with that one.
Yeah, so that will come sometime next year onwards. But yeah, very good. And yes, you're retired now, which is why we're recording this at 10 a.m. on a Tuesday.
Indeed, yes.
Because this would not have been able to happen like this otherwise. So yeah, very good. So kicking us off, to tell our listeners a few things about yourself and about your history with folk music and your sort of history with music in general. How did you, and your musical upbringing and how you came to folk music, or did folk music find you?
More the latter, really. I mean, it was funny that there was a time when people thought that I came from a folky family because my parents were mad keen dancers and they used to go to folk festivals. But actually, they only started going to folk festivals the same time as I did. And then they never stopped. And as I say, absolutely mad keen dancers flung themselves around the dance floor. But I didn't have any experience of folk music growing up. The closest probably was when I was at primary school. I absolutely loved Singing Together, which was on the school's radio on a Wednesday morning or whenever it was. And in retrospect, a lot of those songs were folk songs or folk adjacent, maybe, but they weren't presented as folk songs, and I certainly didn't know they were folk songs at the time. So, I used to love singing, and I learned the recorder like kids do, and I was very bad at the trumpet at secondary school, but and I sang in the school choir, so I was very keen on making music. But the kind of the critical moment, thanks to the internet, I can tell you exactly when this occurred. It must have been at about 7:45 in the evening on Thursday, the 13th of November, 1975.
Hang on, what day did you say? What was the something of November?
13th of November, 1975.
Do you know that 13th of November is the day your episode's going out? So
there we are. There. Oh. And I was thinking that I should put a date in my diary for 13th of November next year and celebrate 50 years of being a folkie.
Well, there you go. That's how fortuitous.
So, but how this came about was Top of the Pops Thursday evening, and we'd had, again, thanks to the internet, I can tell you, we'd had George McRae, Rod Stewart, Demis Roussos, and David Cassidy, and then on came Steel Ice Band miming to All Around My Hat.
Oh, and I've seen that very clip because that's always on YouTube.
Yeah, and say what you like about that. It's not exactly the way I'd arrange a folk song these days, I can't say I've listened to All Around My Hat for a very long time. But I guess they wanted to have a hit, and they got Mike Battin, who was the man behind the Wombles, and he gave them a hit. And the production it meant that this track didn't sort of sound out of place on Top of the Pops or, pop radio. But what I think must have caught my attention was, well, there was the fiddle and the mandolin, but mostly it would have been Maddie Pryor's vocals, because she doesn't have an exaggerated kind of folky voice, but she's definitely she's a folk singer, not a pop singer, and I think that must have just made it stand out for me, or something did, and I just thought I really like this, and something also said, I guess this must be folk music. I don't know why, but I obviously thought, oh yeah, fiddle, mandolin, yeah, it must be folk music. And the next day at school, I was talking to friends, and my best mate Mike said that his dad had got a copy of a Steel Eye album. And a few days later, I went home from school with Below the Salt, which was an earlier album, 1972, I think.
Oh, yeah.
And that was much folkier you could say it was electric folk rather than folk rock. And a couple of listens of that, and I was just absolutely hooked. And I've not looked back since then. And then, well, so then that Christmas I got the All Around My Hat LP, and I thought, well, this is quite nice, but it's not as good as Below the Salt. So I started looking at their earlier stuff.
I was just looking up Below the Salt.
Is it 72?
1972. That's the Gaudete album.
It was. So that was their previous hit, but that was more of a novelty hit, unaccompanied medieval Latin chants. It's
but that's the album that Gaudete's on.
I think why Mike's dad had bought it. Actually, he was into early music, so he'd heard Gaudete, and then he bought the album.
And if anyone's interested in Steel Eye Span chronology, that was the first post Martin Carthy Steel Eye album.
Yeah. Well, so having heard that, I then went back, and these were the days when you could go into a pokey little record shop in Ashford in Kent where I lived. Actually, there was one pokey little record shop, and there was one really quite big record shop, and you could go in there and, oh, look, here's an interesting looking record, Steel Eye Span, 10-Man Mop, or Mr. Reservoir Butler Rides Again. That's with right. a really good cover. And I bought that and took that home. And yes, so that was the first time I heard Martin Carthy. And I think that's my favourite. Well, that is definitely my favourite Steel Eye album.
Yeah, and that's and linked to the podcast. That's the album that's got the Wee Weaver on it.
Well, exactly. Yes,
and we heard that a couple of weeks ago with Nancy.
Exactly, and that was just Maddie Pryor and Peter Knight on the fiddle, and then there's about half where Martin Carthy plays the acoustic guitar. And it's got electric bass on it, but it's a very acoustic sound. And then the other half, he plays electric guitar, and you've got really good arrangements like Captain Colston. And the best of all is When I Was on Horseback, Roud 2.
That's exactly so. Yes, indeed so. Of course, the point with them was that was at the time that was electrified folk music, but without a drummer.
Without a drummer.
That was the key thing.
Yeah, I don't mind a drummer in my folk rock, but I think most of my favourite records don't have a drummer, and that was definitely my favourite Steel Eye album. And so I was clearly, even at that point, it's like the folkier the folk rock, the better. And then over the next few months, another. Well, I got the Tim Hart and Maddie Pryor, one of their duo albums from the 60s, that must have been. And another friend at school, Pete, lent me a Chieftains album, and he introduced me to the Planxty, and then he sold me what was already a second-hand copy of Fourpence or Spicy Ale, which is the Watersons record, the first Watersons record that's got Martin Carthy on it. So sort of Martin featured prominently, quite by accident in a lot of my early listening. And the Watersons, the first time you hear the Watersons, that's kind of a life-changing experience, really, because I really love the Steel Eye Span vocal harmonies, but the Watersons were all about harmonies, but it's a very different kind of harmony singing. It's keep singing the tune until you can't, and then sing something different. It's that philosophy. No holds barred, and so really loved that. And Mike Eaton, my best friend at school, right from the start, we'd started singing songs. So initially just pinched off Steel Eye albums, and now we were singing Waterson's albums as well, with a funny mixture of, bear in mind we're kind of middle class Kentish 16-year-olds or whatever, a funny mixture of being influenced by Tim Hart's kind of put on folky voice and Mike Waterson with his sort of his Hull voice, and we must have sounded awful, but I would sing the tune, and Mike was really good at picking up a harmony part, singing up a bass line, and we would just sing anywhere. And I remember one afternoon after school, when everyone had gone home, we stood in the stairwell of the school because you've got these really good acoustics. And we just sort of sang there for half an hour or so. And there was this bloke who was about a year or so older than us, and he and his brother were already dancing with the local Morris team. And he came by and he said, "Well, this is all right, but you want to sing some songs from nearer to home. You should listen to the Copper Family." Well, we no idea at all about the Copper Family and didn't do anything about it. But bizarrely, a few months later, Mike's next birthday, his mum bought him not the box set of A Song for Every Season, but there was a single LP which had 12 tracks taken from the box set. And she must have seen that in, one of these, well, either W.H. Smith's or a little independent record shop in Hythe down on the Kent coast. And she must have thought, oh, Mikey will like this. Didn't know anything about it. And it's bizarre, really, 1975, or no, 76 by this point, you could buy a Copper Family LP on your high street, but so she gave it to Mike for his birthday. We taped it, and then over 2 Sunday afternoons, not realizing that Bob Copper had put all the songs in a book, we went through. Mike was paused, press play, 1 line or maybe 2 lines, press pause. I'd write down the words, rewind if we didn't hear them. And over 2 Sunday afternoons, we'd written down all the words of the songs on that album, and probably another couple of weeks, and we knew them all. I did the Bob Copper, and Mike learnt the John or Ron Copper bass line, and we doubled the size of our repertoire. And the Copper Family have been kind of like a touchstone for me ever since, really, because in terms of the English tradition, nobody says a bad word about the Copper Family. They're just such a wonderful institution, and Bob was who I did get to meet a few times, was just such a lovely man. So that was my first introduction, I guess, to traditional singers. And not long after that, I think I discovered that I think it was for the princely sum of 50 pence, you could borrow a couple of LPs from the local public library, and they'd got a really good folk section. I don't know if there was a librarian who was interested in folk, or if not, they just got hold of the Topic, Transatlantic, and Trailer catalogues and bought stuff at random. And you couldn't go wrong, So they'd, and over the next few years, every fortnight, I'd go along with my 50 pence, or it might have been 50 pence per LP, I can't remember, but I'd go along once a fortnight, take 2 records home, tape them, obviously, because I couldn't afford to buy all these records, and I just wanted, it wasn't just I wanted to listen to the records again, I wanted to learn the songs, so I was, as a friend put it, I was hoovering up everything I could find. I got my first introduction to John Kirkpatrick and Sue Harris, Nick Jones, Dick Gaughan. First time I heard a Martin Carthy solo album, but also they'd got a lot of field recordings. So I think the first record I borrowed was actually Songs of Seduction from that Folk Songs of Britain and Ireland series from the 60s. And why would a 16-year-old boy borrow a record called Songs of Seduction, I wonder. But wishful thinking, I have to say. Those records have been rightly panned because they chopped verses out, and sometimes they'd even chop up a ballad, so you'd have the first few verses by one singer and then next few verses by another singer, which is kind of disrespectful. But on the other hand, someone who was new to folk music, 2 sides of an LP, I got to hear Harry Cox, Thomas Moran, Jeannie Robertson, John Strachan, loads, a real wide variety of English, Irish, and Scottish traditional singers. So yeah, quite early on, I was listening to traditional singers, and I think initially it was it's a bit of a curiosity, but I can learn some songs here. I'd borrow an album and I'd think, oh, what songs can I learn off this record? But as time went by, I got to appreciate the singers themselves, for their own merits. And from the library, they had a whole load of those sort of compilations of Mike Yates recordings, Sussex Garland, Songs of the Open Road, all of those. And they also had George Maynard record, his LP on Topic, which I really loved, and a couple of Walter Pardon LPs. And I think Walter quite soon became my favourite traditional singer. And I saw him in about 1980. Well, I saw him a few times, but the first time was 1980, I think. And I was really impressed. I knew he was a good singer from the records, but what I liked was he was so completely self-effacing. This was at one of these little festivals where basically everyone sits around in a circle and, you go round, and when it's your turn, you sing a song. And when it was Walter's turn, he'd stand up and he wouldn't even say what he was going to sing. And there was certainly none of this, long rambling introductions that we all do in folk clubs, saying what the song's about, blah, blah, blah. He just stood up, sang it, and pretty much as he was singing the last note of the song, he'd sit down again. And he had this really unshowy way of singing, which really appealed to me. I really, really rate Walter Pardon. And I think by that time, so I guess I would have been coming up to 20 at that point. But that time I was genuinely appreciating traditional singers. And I was always kind of interested in, I suppose, in finding out more about the songs and about the singers as well. So I've always had that kind of interest. Right from the start, even with Blow the Salt, it's got fairly cryptic sleeve notes, as Steel Eye albums often did in those days. But it mentions Harry Cox, and it mentions, again, I think it's John Strachan and Queen Caroline Hughes, names that meant nothing to me at the time. But then a bit later on, I'd come across them on a record or in a book and think, oh, yeah, okay, yeah, Steel Eye sang one of their songs, and it would begin to make sense. So that's how I got into it, and all the while singing, particularly mostly in harmony, and on my own, and gradually adding the concertina. But it was quite a while before I was good enough on the concertina to be able to play it and sing it at the same time. But I guess probably by the time I left university, I could do that.
Yeah, I can. Yes, I can also attest to as a melodeon player and concertina player myself that playing a concertina is one thing, singing is one thing, but the two together is another thing entirely.
Well, I think what when I finally cracked it was I thought that the best way to start would be to do a tune with a jolly rumpty-tumpty-tump rhythm, like you play on a concertina. But actually, that's almost the word. What the best thing is to do a slower, more drawn out song. So because otherwise you're singing Humpty Tumpty Tumpty Tumpty, and it's awful, So actually, I think the breakthrough was when I know what song it was. It was George Maynard's "Down by the Seaside."
Very good.
And I can't remember whether I actually learnt it from him or Shirley Collins, because I think I heard their versions around about the same time. But a slowish song where it was more drawn out chords, there's no dancey rhythm. And then I found that actually I could breathe without trying to breathe in a jig rhythm or whatever. So I think that was kind of the breakthrough.
Yeah. In fact, I sing that song myself these days.
It's a lovely song. Shirley used to ask me to sing it. I always felt rather embarrassed. I'd go down to Lewis and she'd say, sing Down by the Seaside. And it's like, oh, really? I wouldn't have sung that because I learnt it from you.
Yes, I do it with my trio Culverake, the 3-part harmony version.
Yeah, I look forward to seeing your trio.
Thank you. Yes, we'll be around. We'll
be around. Good.
Yeah, and so I guess all that. Yes, I always bring this up because it's really good, but it doesn't exist anymore. But all that hard work paid off because you won an award at Sidmouth Folk Festival.
You've seen the photo for me with my shorts on.
Yes, I love the fact that you've won an award for folk singing, I think, isn't it?
Well, it was a thing. I don't know how long it lasted. That was the very first one, and it was promoted by Jim Lloyd, who used to present Folk on 2 on Radio 2, kind of the precursor of the Mark Radcliffe programme, Wednesday night on Radio 2. I don't think it was a Radio 2 thing. I think he'd formed some, English performing folk arts or something like that. And it was at Sidmouth in the Beach Store, which I suspect you don't remember, but you'll have heard people talk about the Beach Store. It was they would have kind of folk clubby events in there, lunchtime, afternoon, and evening. Never really sure what they stored in there, to be honest, because obviously during festival week they'd emptied it out and put a load of wooden chairs in there. But it was very sandy. You'd definitely go home from Sidmouth with, if you'd played the beach store, you'd have sand in your instrument cases. But I used to love it in there. And they 1984, I think it was. Every afternoon, as part of the kind of the afternoon folk club or sing around or whatever it was, they had this competition for Sidmouth singer with heats each day, and the judges were Shirley and Dolly Collins.
Oh,
so
well,
kind of like no pressure.
That's intimidating as hell. Yeah.
Well, I don't know. I was young and confident, and
we were all young and confident once.
Yeah. So I won the first, or I don't know, I won the first heat, but they must have 4 heats from the Monday through to the Thursday, I guess. Right. And I got through the first heat. And then in the final, I remember I can only remember 2 other people that were in it. One was Barbara Berry, who's the mother of Bob Berry, who's kind of omnipresent on the festival scenes these days. Barbara and Lem Berry, his parents, were even more omnipresent back in those days. And she was a lovely singer. She did a lot of work on Alfred Williams' setting, who only collected the words because he didn't know how to, didn't have the capacity to write down the tunes. So she put tunes to a lot of his stuff. And the other singer that was in the final was Bill Prince. I don't know if you've ever come across him.
No, really, I know the name.
Yeah, he's kind of not really, hasn't been active for a long time. He was a really good singer and guitarist, did a lot of his own stuff. But so anyway, I won this massive, great slipware plate. It was about 2 foot in diameter, and it was really lucky actually that my parents were there because I was camping. I might even have gone on the train, but so fortunately my parents were at the festival and were able to take that home for me. Yeah, so yes, I wouldn't have brought that up. I'd almost forgotten about that, but I did. But then it probably kept going for about 10 years. I remember Moira Craig, who you mentioned on a recent episode, she certainly won it one year.
I know. I always bring it up. I just think it's great. So then if it ever comes to me sort of emceeing you at a gig and having to introduce you, more often than not I'll say something like the award-winning Andy Turner or something,
yes,
which sounds so sort of big and grand, like you won a folk award or something.
I did. And around that time, I was living in Kent at that point, and I'd quite often sit in with the Oyster Band when they played Cayleys. I mean, because they'd Steeleye introduced me to folk music, but the first proper barn dance I went to was with the Oyster Cayley Band, who were like one of the best Cayley bands ever. So I quite often sat in with them. Indeed, when Chris Taylor left the band, I found myself playing with them for a few concerts. They'd got they were doing a Far Eastern tour, a British Council Far Eastern tour, and they had because Chris had left the band, they had a vacancy, and I did. Was it 5 days in Japan with the Oyster Band, not playing Cayleys, but doing concerts? And yes, Ian Telfer used to introduce me as the Sidmouth Nightingale, because that was probably the same year or the year after I'd won that Sidmouth singer competition. Yeah,
the Sidmouth Nightingale, fantastic, brilliant. Anyway, moving on from that, yes. We better get on to the song. That's why we're here.
Indeed.
So yeah, Roud 15, the Cruel Ship's Carpenter. Are you able to sort of pinpoint when you've, not necessarily the version you sing now, but when you when you first came across the song?
Yeah, it would be. I mean, I can't tell you exactly when, but it's back to the Ashford Public Library, because one of the records they had was Peter Bellamy's LP on Topic, early 70s LP, I guess. The Fox Jumped Over the Parson's Gate.
It's a 1969 LP. That
is it? 69, as early as that, right? So yeah, it's got a lot of good stuff. It's
Yeah, sorry, because that's Peter Bellamy's third album. So
is
yeah.
it? Right, okay.
Yeah, the first two were mainly Norfolk and then Fair England Shore.
Right. Okay. Well, this is the first time I'd heard it. I hadn't at that point heard Young Tradition, but the first time you hear Peter Bellamy, it's like, blimey, what's this?
Yeah, absolutely.
And yes, there's it's a good mix of sort of unaccompanied stuff, a few with his rather idiosyncratic concertina playing, and some, I can't remember who, but there's someone accompanying him on fiddle on a few tracks, and there's some harmony singing. And there's about 3 or 4 track songs that I learnt from that, because that's what I did in those days.
And the fiddle is Barry Dransfield.
Oh, is it? Oh, well, that doesn't surprise me. Right.
Yeah, there you go. The wonderful Barry Dransfield.
Yes, I do. I don't think that LP was ever re-released as a CD, but you can download it. It's one of the records that Topic has definitely put out as part of their digital archive, if you like.
I think so, yeah.
So I have got a copy of that. So yeah, I learnt, I say, at least 3 songs off that, and I learnt this one, and Peter Bellamy sang it in a great way. He absolutely laid into that phrase that I think you and Vic talk about in the first half. She ripped him and she stripped him. He absolutely milks that. I mean, I don't say that. I don't mean that as a criticism. It's he really makes the most of those lines.
Yeah.
And so hearing him sing it would have prompted me to want to learn it, but I knew that the words were in a book that they had in the public library. They had one of the relatively few books of folk songs they had was Peggy Seeger and Ewan MacColl, the Singing Island, which came out in 1960, which had a lot of, I don't know if it was all songs they'd collected, but a lot of them were. There were some, from McColl's parents, and things like The Flying Cloud was in there, and Fourpence a Day, which was definitely a McColl. Well, I assume he collected it. Either collected it or said he did and made it up. I don't know. It almost certainly had Four Loom Weaver and stuff like that in it. But it had, because of course Peggy Seeger and Ewan MacColl had recorded Sam Larner. So Sam Larner was Peter Bellamy's source.
Yeah.
And they'd recorded Sam Larner. So it had a transcription of Sam Larner's version. And rather than writing the words out from the Peter Bellamy LP, I learnt the words as printed in the book. I suspect that Bellamy hadn't really changed the words very much. And he hadn't, I mean, well, as we all do, when you sing a song, you don't sing it exactly like the source singer, but he hadn't sort of dramatically changed the tune at all. It was many years later, I think, that I heard Sam Larner sing it, because although I got a Sam Larner record probably in the early 80s, that would have been A Garland for Sam, which is one of the Topic LPs that he's on. But this song isn't on that. This song is on Now Is the Time for Fishing, which I think for a long time was one of those fabled records that, probably people like your dad, I imagine, probably had a copy.
Maybe, yeah.
And Rod Stradling, but you couldn't get it for love nor money.
That was a Folkways record, 1961.
Yeah, right.
And Topic released it on CD in 2000.
Exactly. So that's when I would have got it.
Right. Okay. Sure.
And then, of course, Musical Traditions, Rod's label, put out kind of the complete Sam Larner, I seem to remember. Around about the same time or a bit later, so obviously it would be on there. But yes.
Oh, and that one's called Cruising Around Yarmouth, and it's 2 discs of 32, 34 tracks each, and it seems like the complete Sam Larner.
I think so.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm pretty sure Rod sort of collaborated with Peggy Seeger over, the inclusion of their recordings as well.
Oh yeah,
so,
it even says all tracks recorded by Ewan MacColl, Peggy Seeger, and Charles Parker between 1958 and 1960.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
So by the time I heard Sam Larner singing it, and I'd really urge anyone listening to this who hasn't heard Sam Larner to go out and listen to Sam Larner, because he was a fantastic singer.
Yeah, I've not mentioned it yet, but everything Rod Stradling's record label, Musical Traditions, doesn't really exist anymore in the sense that it releases anything anymore. But pretty much because you used to buy when you bought them, it was just he just print off a CD of all the tracks with an official booklet and put it in a case for you. But I'm pretty sure that everything that went on that label is now available to download for like £2 per album.
Download at stupidly cheap prices, yes. And then the booklets are all on the Musical Traditions website, so you can get those as well.
And you can buy, when you buy the tracks for like £2 or £4 per album, then you do get a PDF version of the booklets, I think, as well.
Exactly. Yes.
So even the record label doesn't put anything out anymore and isn't really run much anymore. Everything is still available to buy from them.
Exactly.
And I'd highly recommend spending 20 quid and buying 10 albums. And it's it's very good value for money, the amount of tracks you get on there. It's astonishing.
And often there is an overlap with topic. I mean, there is with Sam Larner and also with Sarah Makeham. For my, because I'm like that. I've got I think it's a double LP, a double CD on topic of Sarah Makeham, and there's something like 3 or 4 CDs on Musical Traditions, and obviously there's a really big overlap. But that was one where you can't go wrong. Even when I bought the CD off Rod, it was probably only a tenner, and anyway. So by the time I heard Sam Larner sing this song, that was years after I'd learnt the song. So, I definitely learnt it from Peter Bellamy, words, Sam Larner's words from The Singing Island. And I mean, to be honest, it's kind of funny that you've asked me on here to sing about the Cruel Ship's Carpenter, because it's not a song that I have sung particularly often, but I was, when you said, "Oh, can you do that one?" Oh, yeah, I've always liked that one, So I went back and sort of thought about it a bit. But I think it's one of those songs where when I learnt it, so when I was, I don't know, 18, 19, 20, something like that, I almost certainly I was probably trying not to, but I almost certainly was singing it like Peter Bellamy, and where he puts a little yelp at the end of a line or a particular thing, I was probably reproducing that. I really remember in my first term as a student, I used to go to this folk club in Oxford called the folk club was the Gypsy Davy Folk Club. It was run at the General Elliot in South Hinksey, which involved a walk. It was in the winter. It involved this slightly dodgy walk across a bridge over a lake and then down a country lane to get to this folk club. It was a really good singers folk club, and I remember singing there, doing a floor spot, and I'm pretty sure it was when it was in my first term as a student, and I sang one song that I'd learnt from Martin Carthy and one song I'd learnt from Cathal McConnell, and in the interval, there's this chap called Graham Metcalf. Fantastic Yorkshire singer. He's actually now living in Canada, but he lived in Oxford for donkey's years. And I think the longer he lived in Oxford, the stronger his Yorkshire accent became. But he was still is a fantastic singer. And he said, "You've got a good voice, but you need to stop singing like the people you learnt the song from and sing it in your own verse." And I knew that that's what I was doing. I mean, as soon as he said it, it was like, yeah, you're right, I am. But it's really difficult. And it was difficult to shake that off. But I think that was one of the best bits of advice anyone has ever given me, because over time I worked at not singing it the way I'd learnt it. And it's funny because when you're listening to a singer, whether it's a modern singer or a traditional singer, often one of the things that sort of hooks you in is, it'll be the tune, but it will often be the way they've sung it. And so if they do something particularly effective, a little decoration or a variation on one line, it's like, oh yeah, I'm going to do that as well. But yeah, so from that point on, I made a conscious effort, and I think these days I pretty much everything I sing, I sing it in the same way, really. I'm not one of these singers that's got different voices for different songs. It's one reason why I don't sing many American songs. I do occasionally sing Almeida Riddle's version of The Wayfaring Stranger, but I find it really hard there to either sing it in my normal voice and without, although, or else I try and replicate that sort of very distinct Appalachian style of singing, which is what made me want to learn it in the first place. And that's not me, so it's it's a bit tricky. That's one I tend to keep to myself, really. I think because I've not really found the way of doing that song. But anyway, so that's why I learned it, and I've only ever sung it unaccompanied. So I don't have a story to tell about how I worked out a concertina accompaniment or how so and so did their guitar accompaniment with that one. But and I don't think I'd ever really but particularly listening to Vic, talk about this song in the first half of the podcast, it was the first time I'd really sort of realised, oh, okay, this is the history of this song, and I'd certainly never realised that the Sam Larner tune is a version of Villikins in his Diner. I mean, now he's said it, I can see what he means, but it's far enough removed to, because Villikins in his Diner was a bit of a boring tune, to be honest. But
there's a whole sort of mine you could do of the way tunes are related and these songs and the way, because a lot of what this podcast ends up doing is looking at the words of songs. We need to keep focusing on the tunes as well and how they evolve and link with other things. And so the reason I knew that you'd sing it at some point was because it was included on your A Folk Song a Week series blog thing. Talk about that for a bit.
So obviously it was inspired by John Bowden's A Folk Song a Day. I think I started mine sort of more or less as his finished. But he gave me and not just me, there were quite a few of these blogs then, and they still keep cropping up. Just suddenly realized that we've all got recording equipment of some kind in our home. Actually, the early recordings on the blog, listening back to them now, the sound quality isn't all that brilliant, but they're now done on a handheld Tascam that cost me about £100, and it's pretty decent quality. But it gave me the idea that you can just record stuff at home. You can get a WordPress blog or whatever, for free, and you can spend money on it, but you can kind of do this more or less for free. And I'd had some problems with my voice. I'd actually had an operation around about 2010. I'd got I think it was called a granuloma in my throat, and I had to have surgery to remove that. And I was not able to sing for a little while before that, because I'd start singing and it was just like you'd got this incredible frog in your throat. And then I had to rest my voice for several months after I'd had the operation. And I was paranoid that this was going to come back again. And I thought, well, I'm going to get these. I know loads of songs. I'm going to get them down for posterity. Also, my work at that time, I was having to commute into West London. It was a blooming awful commute, just because either went on one very slow train or I'd try and negotiate faster trains, which then didn't. One would be late, and anyway, I felt that I was under a lot of pressure at work, had a bit of a workaholic boss, and I felt that I wasn't finding enough time for music. So I thought, okay, I'm going to set myself a target. I'm going to sing at least one song a week. And I'm going to set myself a target of writing a little bit about it and putting it on a blog. And as time went by, I'd write quite a lot. Probably not very much about this song, but basically I'd go, I think when I started, I thought, oh, I don't know, I might know a couple of hundred songs, and it just kept expanding. I mean, I kept it going for 5 years, and this would have amazed my boss at the time, who, was always complaining that I couldn't keep deadlines. But actually, I'd set myself a really important deadline as far as I was concerned, and every week for 5 years, there was a blog post. I mean, often I'd record a whole batch, half a dozen in one go. But so that was 260 blog posts, sometimes 2 songs, particularly at Christmas, because there's only a limited window when you can really post up Christmas songs and carols. So quite often then I'd be posting up a couple of songs a week. But it got to 260, and I felt that I can't keep this going every week anymore. But I've kept it going on an occasional basis, and actually, what are we up to? 319? I can't remember.
Something like that. Well, this song, The Ghost Ship, is week 289.
So that was a fairly late one. Was it 289?
Yeah.
Oh, right. So that was after I stopped.
Posted on the 17th of May, 2020.
Well, there we are. Oh, that's very odd. I'm up to 318. They come completely irregularly. Right.
Yes.
So that's interesting. That's some time after I'd stopped doing the weekly episodes. I'd kind of thought in my head that basically when I was doing those weekly episodes, I was just going through, oh, I used to know this song. I used to know this song. This one must have been a bit of an afterthought then. I must have suddenly remembered. Maybe that was when I downloaded the Peter Bellamy album that I'd learnt it off. I don't know. Really can't remember.
Maybe, yeah. Yes, but I've been making a list ever since I started learning folk songs. I've made a list of all the songs I know or not necessarily all the songs I could sing if you asked me to right this second at the drop of a hat. But, every time I've learnt a song, I put it on the list, and then the list grows just as a reminder of stuff I used to sing as well as current stuff. And the list is only at about 105 now, I think, or something. Over the last sort of, I guess, where are we now? I kind of think when that would have been. For anyone who's listening, I'm trying to pin this by how old I am. I turned 35 yesterday, and so we're talking maybe 20 years of learning folk songs, and I've only done like 105. But I have had longers in that period where I haven't learned anything. I'm not learning 3 songs a month. I'm learning. It depends on what the schedule of bands and things, whether I learn stuff or not. But
yes.
But 105 is not bad,
No, not at all. Not at all. And the songs that I've posted, there's quite a lot of them I could sing at a drop of a hat. There's another large batch where I might need to have a bit of a run up at it, because, I haven't sung this song for a long time. I need to remind myself the words. And there's a few where I would actually, oh gosh, I completely need to relearn that. And a tiny number where it's like, I really like this song and nobody else sings it. I've had it in my notebook for the last 30 years, and I have to recognise I'm never going to be bothered to learn the songs of this. But look, I've got a blog, so I'll stick it up here, and then it's out there, and someone else can sing it if they want to.
Absolutely. But I could do 2 years of a folk song a week if I wanted to.
Yeah, you've got enough podcasts already, Matt.
I do. That's true. I'm not gonna bother with that. But I've got enough songs for 2 years worth of.
I used to be really good at learning songs when I was younger. I think I used to just suck them up, and then as you get more commit, like you're saying, your various bands, that you'll learn the songs that you need to learn for the band, and it impinges on your time to learn other stuff. And definitely now.
Yeah,
I'm really bad at learning. And behind me here, I've got a music stand with probably half a dozen songs that I'm planning to learn. But what I need to do is just pick one of them, learn that one, get it under my belt, and then come back to the others, because there's a danger I won't learn any of those half a dozen songs. But there's lots of songs out there I still want to learn.
I know I've got a list of songs I want to learn as well, but it depends. Yeah, if you're in a band and you sort of certainly like I'm in with Cold Rake or my duo with George Sansom, is that you'll learn the songs for that album or that sort of set list, and you'll tour that set list for 2 years or something. So I'm only playing those 16 songs for a year or two, and then I learn some more. So it's there was a point when I tried to learn a song every couple of weeks as an experiment. It didn't really work. That was I was young back then.
Something, sometimes the song just crops up and it's like, oh right, I have got to learn that song. And yeah, sometimes that still happens now. And actually I see this one was, so this one I posted, it was during lockdown. So I did actually I revisited quite a lot of songs during lockdown. I learnt a few new ones, or a few that I think had been on my list for a long time, and I actually did knuckle down. So I think just because, well, couldn't go out, I was in the fortunate position of not being laid off, on I was going to say on furbelow. What was the expression? On furlough.
Furlough.
Furbelow was the folky furlough.
Yes,
we
all frills and furloughs.
Exactly.
Yes.
I was actually the job where we were all working stupidly hard during lockdown, and seemingly for the next couple of years after that, which is one reason why I've now retired slightly early. But all the same, there was a lot of time when we couldn't go out, and I would unwind by, just playing the concertina for an hour and revisiting some songs. So, I was remiss in not posting this as one of the first 260 songs on my blog, but I'm glad I remembered it.
Yeah, it didn't take you long to remember it after the main batch. Well, yeah, we're in the folk world are indebted to you for your. It's become a resource, just like this podcast is. But people have been telling me this. It's already we've become resources.
Oh, you definitely have. You get sort of Steve Roud and Vic Gammon and so on, sort of, and John Molden as well. There was shame there's not more Irish songs so you can't get him on more often. But there's been some. That's definitely a resource, and I'm kind of quite proud of a folk song a week, because when I started, it's like, oh, let's see how this goes. But yeah, there's plenty of songs on there that everyone will know. You don't need my blog to find the standard folk club version of Fathom the Bowl, Learnt from the Watersons, or Dido Bendigo, but they're both up there because they're both songs that, I learnt and have enjoyed singing, even they're not ones I would often sing these days. But I don't know when the next song's coming along, but there will be more.
Yes, you're running out of ideas, whereas this podcast it will never fall short of an idea.
No.
46,000 songs. Anyway, we've moved away from the song quite a lot, but we've kind of we've talked quite a lot.
Yes, but actually, just going back to the song, it's a horrible story, but it tells it really well, and I quite like the fact that this version has got a verse or two lopped off the front. It comes in, now the Queen she wants sailors to sail on the sea. And you think, oh, it's going to be a song about, I don't know, going off to fight the French or pirates or whatever. Oh, no, but which made pretty Polly's stout heart for to bleed. Okay, it's a farewell, lovely Nancy, don't go to the sea. Oh, I'll come with you. Or, that kind of song. And then it kind of, he starts leading her through groves and through valleys so deep, and it starts to get a bit darker. And there's that really nice repetition. There's a couple of verses where he leads her through groves and through valleys so deep, and which made pretty Polly to sigh and to weep. Which is not just that it makes it easier for us to learn songs like that, but actually, it's an effective device, because she's been saying, remember the vows you made unto me, but get to verse 4 and it's okay, you're going to murder me, aren't you? And he says, yeah, I am actually, yes. And, here's the grave and the spade standing by. Been digging this all this long night. And he does the dirty and he buries her securely in Upwall, quite sound. He thinks he's got away with it, thinks he's committed the perfect crime. And he hasn't, at least in part because of this sort of sailor superstition that, there's a murderer on board and the ship will be becalmed or whatever. So, that was kind of an appealing part as well, I think. And then the denouement is, comes really quickly, really. The innocent sailor says, "Also, no, it's nothing to do with me," and he says, "Oh no, not me either." But he goes off to to the forecastle, the forecastle, as you would normally say, but probably, I guess, to make it scanny, he went to the forecastle with speed, where he meets the ghost of his lover. And she rips him and she strips him and she tears him in three. And then you get the killer line, because up until now, it's not been entirely clear in this version why he's killed her. It's just like, oh, she's a bit clingy and I couldn't deal with it. But in the last line, because you've murdered my baby and me. So it's only in the last line that you get, I mean, you might have suspected it, but it's only there you get the confirmation that, oh, she was pregnant and that's why he's killed her. I just think it works all around, and we sing these songs and we don't sympathise with the wrongdoer, but in this case we definitely sympathise with the ghost for.
Yeah, I'm just looking at some other versions, the words for the versions, just to see if the baby's mentioned any earlier than the last line, because that's not something that's occurred to me before. Actually, yeah, it's not really. Sam Lan, let's have a look. That's Sam Lan. Well, that's the one but no, it's just mentioned right at the end. It's just, yeah, she had a baby as well.
Yes, actually looking, as you probably are looking on Mainly Norfolk, and
yeah.
They don't seem to say that she was pregnant up until that point. Because that he murdered.
It's a big twist, but it explains really why he kills her.
Yeah, and it's kind of, I mean, not that I necessarily feel that I'm only going to sing a song if it's relevant, but I mean, that unfortunately, that is still relevant. I mean, I remember, I don't know, sort of 15, 20 years ago, there was a murder here of a young girl, I don't know, 15 or whatever, murdered by a boyfriend. He was, a year or two older, buried bizarrely in the murderer's uncle's freshly dug grave in the church. It was a bizarre thing, but it turned out that she was pregnant, and it's like,
yeah,
unfortunately, these things do still happen. I mean, that's not why I sing this. That's not why I sing the song. But
I know it's quite alarmingly sad that a lot of topics that come up in folk song that we think are so antiquated yet still happen now. It's quite alarming. Oh, I'm just looking at the Steel Eye Spam. We'll come on to Steel Eye Spam probably again in a minute, but as you mentioned earlier, they did their version does mention the baby a bit earlier on.
Right.
He led her through woods and through valleys so deep, which caused this young damsel to cry and to weep. Oh Billy, you have led me astray on purpose my innocent life to betray. And she has another verse. Oh Billy, pardon my life. I never will covet for to be your wife. I'll travel the whole world to set myself free if you will but pardon my poor baby and me.
Oh, right, okay.
So it's mentioned there once, but at that point, when she's sort of trying to stop him killing her,
Yeah. Well, I'm pretty sure that's Benji Kirkpatrick that sings the lead vocals on that. When Benji was in Magpie Lane for a few years, and towards the end of his time, we'd started doing an arrangement of this song, and I'm pretty sure the one that he sings comes from Roy Palmer's Folk Songs of the West Midlands. Yeah, so okay, which I happen to have on my shelf here. Text broadside printed by T. Bloomer of Birmingham. Tune sung by George Dunn. Oh, okay. So it's not George Dunn's words,
Right.
which I don't have in front of me, although no doubt you and I have both got access to George Dunn's version.
Quite possibly somewhere, yeah.
Well, that would be on one of those musical traditions albums as well, won't it? I think.
Yeah.
Now we look into it. That actually is an unusual version in that it mentions the baby early on.
I guess it's the versions that have a second verse, a second stanza of Polly, Molly, etc., sort of begging for her life, because normally you get one after she's found the grave that's been dug for her, and she has one verse about "Oh, spare me my life," or "You've led me so wrong," and there's normally just one. But if there's a second stanza, then it mentions the baby.
Yeah,
that seems to be the case with what we can tell just from preliminary scanning of it now.
Although actually, I think something similar is in the Sam Lana version that I sing, but I'll travel so in this one it's I'll travel the whole world to set myself free if you will but pardon my poor baby and me. The version I sing is I'll travel the country over all four to set you free, and then you get a reprise of the please remember those vows that you made unto me, which has already cropped up in at least two verses. I think before that.
It's the end. Yeah, remember the vows that you made unto me is a standard bit there, isn't it?
Yeah, it rhymes. But anyway, so there we go. We both learnt something there, Matt.
There we go. And yeah, so is there anything else that you want to talk about before we move on to the?
No, I think that's probably all I've got to say about the song itself. Yeah, fine.
Okay, so we just mentioned Steel I Span. They recorded it on one of the more recent albums, wasn't it? It was 2019 album of theirs for their 50th anniversary called Established 1969.
Yeah,
and so that album is available there. What other revival singer, as it were, versions would you recommend? We've already mentioned some of them already, haven't we? Like Peter Bellamy.
Yeah, well, definitely Peter Bellamy. Fox Jumped Over the Parson's Gate.
Of course, he called it the Ghost Song.
The Ghost Song, which was Sam Lana's name for it. Yes,
that's right.
Bit of a spoiler there. You know, there's going to be a ghost in the song, but
that's right.
It takes some while for the ghost to appear.
But sometimes people learn it from
the ghost ship. The ghost ship. It was, yes.
Yeah.
So besides that, there's 3 recordings of basically the same version, all of which are good. Norma Waterson, actually on a Waters & Carthy album, their second album, Common Tongue. She sings it with, I think, just with Martin playing the guitar, and it's absolutely phenomenal. Why wouldn't it be? Her brother Mike Waterson sang it unaccompanied on. He put out an LP just called Mike Waterson in the 70s. Again, this is a Topic LP, which it might have been released on CD, but it's definitely available digitally.
I'm pretty sure I've got an actual CD copy of it.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. Yes.
Oh, that's 1977. And then that track. Oh, and A.L. Lloyd did the sleeve notes, I think.
He always did. If you put out a record on Topic in those days, A.L. Lloyd always did the sleeve notes, I think.
And he said this version was got by Peter Kennedy and Sean O'Boyle from Paddy McCluskey and of County Antrim, and it's in and this links into something I was about to mention later. It's in one of the journals of the English Folk Dance and Song Society. I think that says Volume 3, Number 1.
Right. Okay.
And which I might have on my shelves somewhere. But so because I was going to mention later on, I'll mention it now, is Jim Eldon was a wonderful singer and fiddle player, and from Hull, and he gave it essentially to Mike Waterson. That's where Mike Waterson learned it from, was Jim Eldon. So you can trace this by Norm Waterson, Mike Waterson, Jim Eldon, and Jim recorded it Obviously, he must have learnt it a long time ago because he gave it to Mike and Mike recorded it in 1977. But Jim put it on an album in 2016 called Songs and Fiddle Tunes, which is very good. And I learnt one of his songs from that album. We Come With a Message from Genghis Khan, which is one of Jim Eldon's own songs, which I love. All Jim wrote about it was from the Journals of the Folk Song Society. So if you link that back to A.L. Lloyd's notes, Journals of the Folk Song Society, Volume 3, Number 1.
So Volume 8, Number 1. I'm looking at the...
Or was it...
It's
beg your pardon. I misread the V as volume. So it's V, so Volume 8, Number 1, which is probably why I've got it. And
I don't know when that was. I don't know, 1907 or something like that.
I know Volume 8 might.
Oh no, Volume 8. Oh no, sorry, Volume 8, not Issue 8. Yes.
No, I've got on my shelves most volumes from 1939 onwards, so I think it's somewhere around 1939 or 1940.
Right. Okay.
Anyway, that's slightly tangent, but nevertheless interesting.
The other recording of the same version that I was going to mention was just Jackie Oates on her first album.
That's right. It was. I remember buying that first album from her as her album called Jackie Oates from 2006.
Yeah. So three contrasting versions of the same. Well, I actually haven't heard the Jim Eldon, but probably 4 contrasting versions of the same song.
Yeah.
Another one that's mentioned on the on Mainly Norfolk, and which I would have forgotten about otherwise, was just that. But I do have the vinyl. Was Mick Ryan and John Burge. Mick Ryan still very much in evidence on the folk scene, sort of writing folk operas and such like. So back in 1978, on what I would assume would be the first album he ever made, he used to play with a guitarist called John Burge, and they became one half of Crows, who were one of my absolute favourite bands at the time. So yeah, the Cruel Ship's Carpenter was on their album Fair Was the City. So it was effectively the title track, because Fair Was the City is the start of the song. I looked on the internet thinking someone has probably uploaded that to YouTube. I couldn't find it, but actually you can, if you're a fan of Mick Ryan, you can get it off Discogs for about $5, I think. So
there we go.
So it's not totally inaccessible.
No, indeed. Yes, only mildly inaccessible.
Indeed, you've got to really want it. Yes.
Yeah. I was just looking at the going back to Jim Eldon and everything. Jim Eldon called the song "Fair Ones Are Shining,"
right?
Because we got it from the Folk Song Journal, and that Folk Song Volume 8, and then I was just I'd found something that mentioned that verse somewhere else, and I've now lost it. But the Paddy McCluskey singing it, which would have been on that Folk Songs of Britain LP set, has the first verse, which isn't. I mean, some of it's found elsewhere, but the first line is, fair ones are shining on foreign earth and town. There lived a young damsel, her name was Miss Brown. She courted young Willie, her darling to be. His trade's name and steady, a ship's carpenter had been. And
that's amazing.
And that 2, 3, and 4 line is quite standard. But this opening line of fair ones are shining on foreign earth and town is quite, I was about to say quite unique. That's a terrible thing to say. It was, it's not unique, but it's interesting. It doesn't crop up as much, that fair ones are shining. It's Martin Carthy's sleeve notes on the Waterson Carthy album. He said, Jim Eldon is responsible for both Norma and Mike learning the song Polly's Love, which Jim Eldon collected in East Riding, and they both sing Jim's astounding "Fair Maids Are Shining" first verse. But I think since then, and in 2016, Jim had changed it back to "Fair Ones Are Shining." But it's an odd opening. You don't hear that opening very much.
No, absolutely.
Which is very interesting. Very good. Oh yeah, and Mick Ryan and John Burge. I would also recommend, talking of Folk Song a Week and Folk Song a Day, John Bowden also sang the Ghost Ship from the singing of Peter Bellamy as part of his Folk Song a Day project. 11th of June 2011. So it's the 11th song in the June month of Folk Song a Day from 2011. So I'll also mention an excellent duo who also, it was the same version. I think they got it from Mike Waterson, I'm pretty sure, is Mike Wilson and Damien Barber. Um, Mike Wilson of the Wilsons, and who are very, very good friends of Mike Waterson, and Damien Barber, who was in effect mentored by Peter Bellamy in a way, and they sing the Cool Ship's Carpenter, which they say got it from Mike Waterson, who got it in turn from Jim Eldon, and so it's the same. So you can track this stuff because everyone got it from Jim. So everyone got it from Jim Eldon, essentially. That's what it seems like.
Yes.
Jim Eldon seems to have spread this song around.
Yeah. Oh, I want to go back and look at I don't know. I was just looking at that volume 8. It's 1956, which I suspect I might have on my shelves as well. I want to look at that. And there's obviously it was recorded. But the recordings are with the BBC Sound. British Library Sound Archive, which currently is still unavailable since that hack that the British Library website had about a year ago, and I don't think any of their audio recordings are back on but eventually they will be. I have no idea whether this particular recording was available there, but if you go to the British Library in St Pancras, you'd be able to call it up.
Indeed. And I've just checked. Yes, I do have 1956. The Folk Song Journal is on my shelf.
Right.
And I must have spotted it in there. Anyway, the other one I'll mention is keeping it in with another. We've just had John Bowden mentioned, but another previous In the Roud guest we had on at the end of season 1 was Holly Clark. And her band, Holly and the Reavers, who were on the same stage as you at Whitby Folk Week, we mentioned. Yeah, on their album, they made an album last year, 2023, called Three Galleys, and and then so the track 3 on that album is In Dublin's Fair City, and that was they say that they got that one from Jeannie Robertson, the Scottish singer, and we did mention Jeannie Robertson in the first half with Vic.
Yeah,
and so they sing that version because obviously, yeah, that's the one that is the Irish version because it's In Dublin's Fair City, In Dublin Fair Town, and Miss Brown. So that's definitely the Irish sort of line of that song that somehow made its way to Jeannie Robertson in Scotland. So sometimes these songs jump around, and you're never quite sure how they jumped around. But how did this one centering on Ireland turn up in Scotland? But there we go. But yeah, Holly and the Reavers on their album Three Galleys, highly recommended. Right, well,
I guess we ought to mention a few American versions as well. I mean, if you go on Wikipedia,
oh yeah,
the Wikipedia page for Pretty Polly, the American version, there's an incredibly long list of people that have, and I haven't checked many of these out. You know, Bob Dylan, Burl Ives, David Linley, Doc Boggs, Gene Ritchie, all kinds of people. Patti Loveless, Pete Seeger. Sam Amidon, I did check that one out. My note here says interesting folk rock version. But I think the first American version I heard, or the first one I can remember, was actually on a Byrds album. It's on the Byrds LP or CD, Sweetheart of the Rodeo, which is the album that had Graham Parsons on it. But this one is where it is sung by Roger McGuinn, and it's got that very distinctive electric, jangly 12-string guitar. So, but I'm sure there's plenty more kind of authentic acoustic versions out there as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's so widely spread in America, this song. Just very impressive.
But it is, it's just a straightforward murder ballad in America, isn't it? So, I mean, it's a perfectly fine song, but it's not as interesting as the British version, I think, where you've got that supernatural element that really makes it distinctive.
Yes, of course. Right, I think we'll call things to a halt.
Absolutely.
So hold there. Yeah, thank you. Thanks so much for coming on and talking about that and about your blog and everything else. We'd love to have you back at some point in the future because there's, almost 400 songs that are on your blog. I'm sure some other ones are in the first 200 Roud numbers, shall we say?
Yeah, I haven't got a list classified by Roud numbers. I should do that.
Yes, I highly recommend doing that. I highly recommend people look at the Roud numbers they sing. And
I bet I've got some that are really high up.
Yeah. Well, I've, through my research and sorting out some songs for the Patreon, I've actually caused Steve Roud to create some new Roud numbers. So a song I recommend to him, he said, "Oh, well, that'll be 46,322 or something." So I've rummaged
around in the back of his drawer and he found a few going spare, did he?
Yeah, that's right, exactly. So yes, I'd love. Yeah, it'd be great to have you back at some point. But we'll call it to a halt there. So in the meantime, Andy Turner, thank you very much.
Thanks, Matt. It's been a pleasure.
Now the Queen, she wants sailors to sail on the sea, which made pretty Polly's stout heart for to bleed, saying, "William, dear William, don't you go to sea. Remember the vows that you made unto me." But it was early next morning before it was day. He went to his Polly, these words he did say, "Oh, Polly, dear Polly, you must come along with me, before we are married, my friends, for to see." Well, his letter through groves and through valleys so deep, which made pretty Polly to sigh and to weep. "Oh, William, dear William, don't you go to sea. Remember the vows that you made unto me." But his letter through groves and through valleys so deep, which made pretty Polly to sigh and to weep. "Oh, William, dear William, you've led me astray, on purpose my innocent life to betray." "Oh, yes, pretty Polly, 'tis true all you've said, for all this long night I've been a-digging your grave." Well, the grave being open and the spade standing by, which made pretty Polly to weep and to cry, oh, pardon my innocent life, and I ne'er will regret for to be your dear wife. I'll travel the country over, all for to set you free. Please remember those vows that you made unto me." But it's no pardon I'll give. And with that he drew out a long daggered knife, oh, it stabbed her through the heart till the blood then did flow, and into the grave her fair body did throw. Always buried her securely in upwall quite sound, not thinking this murder should ever be found. And then he went on board for a sailor to go, not thinking this murder should ever outthrow. But it was early one morning before it was day, our captain come down and these words he did say, "Our ship she's in mourning and she cannot sail on. There's a murderer on board which has lately been done." Well, then up stepped one sailor, and indeed that's not me, and up stepped another, the same he did say. Then up steps bold William to stamp and to swear, "Well, indeed that's not me, sir, I vow and declare." Always hasten to the forecastle with speed, there is met his pretty Polly, which made his heart to bleed. For she's ripped him and she's stripped him, she tore him in three, because he had murdered her baby and she.
That was Andy Turner singing The Ghost Ship. That brings us to the end of the episode. What did you think? What are your thoughts on the song? I'd love to hear from you. If you'd like to get in touch, feel free to drop me an email at intheroud@singyonder.co.uk or visit the podcast on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. Just search for In the Roud, a folk song podcast. If you're enjoying the podcast, I would very much appreciate it if you would give us a little rating and review on your podcast app of choice. That really helps the podcast to reach a wider audience. And if you'd like to support the podcast in a financial manner, you can. In the Roud now has a Patreon. Just go to patreon.com/intheroud. And for either a £5 or £10 per month subscription in support of the podcast, you will receive weekly bonus episodes, mainly focusing on other songs from further on in the Roud Index, but also other episodes on areas of folk song including collectors and singers. This week's Patreon episode is the final part of our 3-episode Singer's Choice mini-season with special guest Nancy Kerr. And her chosen song for this week is the song labelled Roud 165, Adieu Sweet Lovely Nancy. To hear that and more, just head over to patreon.com/intheroud. One last huge thanks to this week's guests, Vic Gammon and Andy Turner. Join me next week for episode 6. We will be looking at Roud 16, which is the song The Frog and the Mouse. My historical guest will be Steve Gardam, and my singer guest will be Jess Arrowsmith. Until then, that's it from me. Stay safe, be well, and I'll see you next time in the Roud.